I've been thinking a lot about Joyboy lately. We've gotten to see more of what he looks like with Emu, we've seen more of their weird relationship, but who really was he? Why is he so similar to Luffy? But what especially has me scratching my head is the place that he was from, the Great Kingdom and this giant empire of the Void Century. You know, the mysterious nation that Emu and his alliance at the end toppled in order to solidify power as the world government, even though now there seems to be a lot more to the story, and after literally spending years at this point diving into it, here's a core theory I've landed on. Remember Joyboy's symbol here? You know, this circle with the 8 smaller circles around it? Right now, I kind of think that each of these individual circles might represent a current-day country or nation that was actually allied with Joyboy and the Great Kingdom. You know, places like Fishman Island or Wano, who we know for sure were on Team Joyboy back during the Void Century, and many of these countries like Alabasta have this same Joyboy logo in their flag. And as you'll see throughout this very long video, when it was clear that their side was losing, it looks like the Great Kingdom put plans into action like spreading the poneglyphs to make sure that someone would someday be able to defeat Emu in the future. And across the last 6 months or so, I've put together a string of theory videos, each one individually dealing with different parts of the Great Kingdom and their plans to set up the next Joyboy, but they all lead to one big payoff together, and today, that's this video. I want to share those theories as part of kind of one package as a compilation, and in between I'll actually want to react to each one of them, think, you know, about what I still think works well, what might have changed with recent chapters and all the Emu stuff going on in Elbaf, and just put everything in context, and what I might have gotten wrong based on some new information as well. And the first one I want to start with here is maybe the most important one because it has to do with 3 islands, Alabasta, Water 7, and Wano, the 3 countries that work together to hide Pluton and that share a very weird relationship and similarity with each other. Why it looks like Water 7 can be stacked on top of Alabasta, what Pluton has to do with it, and why Wano is in the loop as well. The One Piece world's greatest weapon was constructed in Water 7, its location was hidden in Alabasta, and now it waits slumbering beneath Wano, preserved by Joyboy for the final war against Emu. I'm on a mission to uncover the secrets of the Great Kingdom and the allies of Joyboy during the Void Century as they hid his symbol in their own flags. They hid the true history within the poneglyphs, and they've quietly been preparing the world for the next coming of Nika. And today I want to start with the countries that conspired to build and hide Pluton so that it could be used in the final war against Emu, Alabasta, Water 7, and Wano. But these nations have a lot more to hide than just a giant battleship that can destroy the entire planet. I think that these countries themselves were meant to survive the cataclysms that ended the first and second One Piece world, and to ensure that the new dawn would finally come in the form of Luffy. You might not know this, but Arubana is the oldest known city in the One Piece world. At over 4,000 years old, this ancient desert palace is nearly as old as Ohara's Tree of Knowledge, the actual oldest thing in the story. But with all the crazy new revelations we've been getting about the One Piece timeline in recent arcs, I've kind of got to ask the question, does that mean that Arubana is even older than the first world? Like, has Alabasta specifically survived not just one, but 2 apocalypses? Let's be real, not even the X-Men could handle that many apocalypses. Apocalypse? What's the plural? And with the One Piece world going through apocalypsi like they're in style at the moment, this ain't Alabasta's first rodeo, I think. Arubana specifically is very weird and has been built to last. Duralast. And throughout the centuries recently, I think that it's been sharing its end of the world avoiding knowledge with the rest of its own allies, helping preserve the worshippers of the sun god Nika long into the future. And of course, Alabasta, the sun god Ra, all these things, you know that they're gonna be connected. And to be fair, right now in the story, it's not going super well after Emu managed to erase the world's history already once, but one of Alabasta's monarchs, the legend herself, Nefertari di Lily, preserved a poneglyph there and spread the other poneglyphs throughout the world anyways to record the location of Pluton hidden within the catacombs of the kings so that it could be used in the future, hopefully against Emu. But you might rightfully be asking, what about that first world? And when Crocodile is demanding info on Pluton, Robin misdirects him by lying about its contents, just listing a bunch of historical facts about the country of Alabasta. But Robin's own historical knowledge, of course, doesn't lie. Knowing all the history is kind of her entire thing, right? She's the most literate person in One Piece, hands down, I think is a fair statement to do. Vegapunk, maybe, but you know, you get it, very close. But she kind of tells us plenty of hints in the scene from Alabasta's ancient history that are so old they actually used a different calendar altogether than the rest of the One Piece world uses today. And if Alabasta is that old, it's very possible, I think, that the country already existed during the first One Piece world, before Joyboy, before even Devil Fruits. I mean, if it was 800 years exactly between the second world and the third world, I'd say that Alabasta for sure existed in the first world, maybe even further back throughout multiple cycles of destruction and rebirth, because there must have been something before the first One Piece world too, right? So the country didn't just last through the Void Century and, you know, the entire giant war and the flooding of the world, but throughout the days of Nika and the Hellflame Serpent. In other words, it's old. It's even older than I feel right now. Oh boy, it's happening this year. I'm not ready to turn 30. Let's not think about it. Anyways, Alabasta, right? With all of its history, it still bears the scars of that millennia-old conflict. After all, we all know how the second world ended, flooding, but how about the first one? That one ended in flames. The world was covered in darkness and ash, and Alabasta is a scorched, arid landscape. Ancient ruins litter its desert, buried by centuries of sand and dryness, but it wasn't always like this. Remember, when the Straw Hats arrived on Alabasta, it was suffering from a long drought caused by Crocodile and his use of the, by the way, very weird and mysterious dance powder. I think I mentioned this in another video recently, but rereading Alabasta, the entire dance powder thing and how it takes away humidity from one place but then floods another, very weird. I kind of wonder if it's going to be relevant again. But that's not the point. The point is that cities like Irumalu here were once known as green oases filled with plant life and plentiful water. But what if thousands of years ago in the One Piece world, the entire country of Alabasta, which was way bigger since it wasn't flooded yet, was just fundamentally different? What if the entirety of the country was once green? That would actually have precedent in our real life, because in case you didn't know, the real Sahara Desert, which of course houses the real-life Egypt that Alabasta is based on, also used to be very much green and lush millennia ago, and they've been finding these old buried cities recently and like old dried out riverbeds that probably existed a couple thousand of years ago. Now, Crocodile's plan, of course, was just a tiny taste of the massive climate change that's been affecting the One Piece globe for literal centuries, a world changed first by fire, and then by a massive worldwide flood during the Second World. In fact, I believe that Alabasta actually includes tons of major hints for the entire endgame of the series, because it was the first major saga after the East Blue, and a lot of it was probably outlined back when Oda was still working from his original 5-year timeline for completing One Piece to begin with, which, yeah, is a thing. If you didn't know, originally the plan was to actually, you know, have One Piece be finished in 5 years, which, you know, Oda overshot slightly. You know, just a chill 25 years so far, and I hope it's gonna be 40 or 50. The longer, the merrier. But yeah, while Alabasta was going on, Oda was probably feeling like he needed to wrap up the story soon. That's probably why Vivi and Cobra have come back in major ways recently, and why Nefertari di Lily has been revealed as a super important character during the Void Century specifically. So early themes of things like erased history, changing the climate, the pattern established by Crocodile of trying to dethrone rightful rulers by making himself look like a hero, I kind of think it's all laying down some major clues for how One Piece is gonna end and the final saga altogether, and maybe even give us more hints to what the One Piece world looked like during the first world as well. So let's take a look now in detail, right? The way that the city of Alabana itself has been preserved, an elevated platform city with architecture dug down into the bedrock itself, could have helped the residents during the first world to survive the fires that might have raged across the planet. The underground structures, like the Tomb of the Kings, could have helped people survive the clash between Nika and the Hellflame Serpent long enough to rebuild on the surface afterwards, Again, something that kind of has some precedent in the real world, where there are these giant shelter caves in a lot of countries like Derinkuyu in Turkey, and like a lot of other places where there were like entire underground cities for people to take shelter from natural disasters and war. And after surviving the end of the world once, Arubana then made sure it was ready for the next cycle and helped the rest of the world prepare for the end of the Second World. Thousands of years later, Alabasta would most likely become part of the Great Kingdom, often called the Ancient Kingdom, which is, a mistranslation. It's more accurately translated as Great, the Great Kingdom. This country was most likely made up of several places we know that existed along the Grand Line. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that back before the world flooded at the end of the Second World, that they probably shared an entire continent too, that now just turned into islands, and the major places here worshipped the sun god Nika, their flag still bearing the secret symbol of the sun to this day, the one I'm talking about. This great kingdom was spanning the entire globe and was most likely ruled by the pirate king, Joyboy. Because let's be real, Alabasta has all the signs of a major Joyboy ally, Cobra hiding a poneglyph, and he doesn't know why, but he knows he's supposed to keep it a secret from everyone, including the government, and has been passed down through generations of kings. He even knows that the poneglyph's message has something to do with Pluton's hiding spot, and Alabasta's rulers have the D initial, connecting them even more closely to Joyboy and the Void Century. And of course, their flag is the first country that has the symbol of the sun in it, Joyboy's symbol specifically, a big circle surrounded by 8 smaller circles, except that in Alabasta's case, they're actually spinning around and going whee! Right, you get it. It's a sun. It's a sun. It's a desert kingdom. But at the same time, we also know that Alabasta and their ruler, Nefertari di Lily, was one of the founding members of the world government who were opposed to Joyboy to begin with as well. Like, Vivi switched sides at some point, or was kind of playing both sides, seeing which one she liked more. At one point, she was on Imu's side, the evil dude who dethroned Joyboy and took over the entire world. But if that's the case, then why does Alabasta have all these clear signifiers of being a Joyboy ally? Well, we do know that Lily eventually betrayed Imu, spreading the poneglyphs around the globe, but she never made it back to Alabasta to begin with. It wasn't like she pulled back up and was like, nah, we're on JB's side now. No. What's the actual timeline on this, right? Did they somehow become an ally to Joyboy separately from Lily, or were they always an ally and Lily was like a super double agent spy thing? I gotta say, I actually kind of like that one, because looking at all of the facts here, it does seem like she might have only joined Imu with the intention to betray the world government pretty much from the beginning, since their flag and everything else is just perfectly aligned with Joyboy, even though she could never have personally made that alliance after the fact. Or, in going with another one of my personal agendas lately, that God Valley basically spoiled a bunch of the Void Century to us, and Lily might have just been kidnapped by an absolutely obsessed Emu, Shaki style. But then once she actually managed to break free, she might have then been able to spread the poneglyphs around the world, preserving hope for a new dawn in the future. Now, I gotta say, I'm not exactly sure how the poneglyphs' destinations were actually picked, but she did place a pretty crucial one in Alabasta, the one that gives the true location of Pluton. But I'm also pretty sure that the people of Alabasta didn't just play a role in hiding Pluton. I actually think it was more than that, and they actually helped build the thing. And I do think that because, well, I mean, just look at Arubana and look at Water 7. And yes, I know, Oda likes his elevated circular cities with big staircases. He does the same thing in the Flower Capital, though really, if anything, I think that's just more of an argument for what I'm getting at here, because in a lot of cases, all of these are Joyboy affiliated countries having that same layout structure. And I think the obvious answer here is that most of these elevated cities are built like that to avoid the global flooding a second time, a measure that they took to survive the end of the Void Century War maybe, or a measure they might have taken to survive the end of the Void Century War or even earlier wars, again during the First World. But let's also not kid around here. Arubana and Water 7 are way more similar than any of the other islands and cities are like in general. Like you do have the elevation, but on Arubana you have exactly 8 staircases surrounding them, which means that a top view of Arubana and its 8 gates basically are themselves shaped like a massive Joyboy symbol. But with Water 7, you actually get the same thing, but there is 1 giant staircase and 7 docks for a total of 8. It's the same shape as Arubana, but they've just had to keep building on top of the existing city since it's been slowly sinking below the ocean for 800 years now. Now I'm just gonna assume I'm not the first person to have this thought ever in history because it kind of feels obvious, but it still blew my mind because it does seriously look like you could just stack Water 7 right on top of Arubana and it makes perfect sense. And that would make sense if people from Alabasta helped build Water 7 to begin with. One big running theory I have right now, and I'm still probing a little bit, is that the 8 circles in Joyboy's symbol might represent 8 nations or 8 kings that allied with Joyboy, or 8 locations that made up the entire Great Kingdom. In fact, that might just be why so many of the One Piece cities are perfectly circular. They could literally just be the 8 circles of Joyboy's flag. And since Water 7 doesn't really have a flag of its own or any poneglyphs or anything like that, I'm pretty sure it doesn't count as one of the 8 allies. Instead, I think it was built by the 8 allies in secret, maybe during or right before the big war. And as we talked about earlier, Alabasta might have been in the apocalypse surviving business going way back, and if Arubana is a city built to survive the end of the First World, then Water 7 is the perfect city to survive the Second World, continually building upwards to avoid the rising sea level of a giant flood. But Water 7, of course, wasn't just built to survive a flood, it was built for a very specific purpose: the construction of an ancient weapon, Pluton, the perfect shipbuilding island. The entire island is one giant dock. I do wonder if Joyboy's allies needed a place where they could construct the world's ultimate battleship in secret, and if Lily was working with the world government, they certainly couldn't start constructing in Alabasta, but people in Alabasta probably helped create Water 7, which again explains the pretty much identical architecture. Meanwhile, they also brought some other allies together: Samurai from Wano, where Pluton is now, Fishman from Fishman Island, think of Tom and who has been passing down the blueprints of, Pluton, and most importantly, of course, the giants of the Hammer Clan, the Galela, the world's greatest shipwrights, who ended up constructing Pluton. And as you know, this group of shipwrights are the talk of the town right about now, since we do know that my real dad, Roxy Zebek, was looking all over for them and felt like he needed them to take down Emu, and with the connections to Pluton and Water 7, it's not exactly a huge stretch, I think, of the imagination to notice how similar Galela is to Galela, the renowned shipwright company that operates out of Water 7, which is why I was really surprised when rereading the Water 7 arc recently specifically, because you know who named the Galela company? Because you see, I personally actually misremembered it and just kind of thought that the Galela had been operating all these hundreds of years as the single most famous shipwright company on this island, but no, Iceberg was the one who named his company after Tom's death, because at that point Tom's workers was no more, because no more Tom, he pretty dead, but Iceberg brought the 7 rival shipwright companies of Water 7 together under one umbrella, the now newly formed Galela Company, which the text is kind of unclear on whether it was 7 shipwright companies plus the remnants of Tom's workers, which would make 8 in total, which I would personally love, of course, since I'm on a, bit of a binge of noticing every 8 in the entire series to see how everything is just starting to trace back to Joyboy. But honestly, 8 or not 8, what really matters here is how Iceberg got to the name Galela. And the most obvious answer, of course, is that he must have heard it from his own mentor, Tom, the same way that Tom also passed down the blueprints for Pluton in the end to Frankie, not to Iceberg. But last time that I checked, Tom isn't a giant from Elbaf, so why did he, out of all people, end up with these things passed down from the Galela? Because the original Galela were the ones who made the plants, right? So I kind of imagine that before they ended up back in Water 7, Tom, Iceberg, and Frankie, the 7 shipwrights, they were the ones who made the plants, right? So I kind of imagine that before they ended up back in Water 7, Tom, Iceberg, and Frankie, the 7 shipwrights, they were the ones who made the plants, right? So I kind of imagine that before they ended up back in Water 7, Tom probably inherited them back in his own home of Fishman Island. Also, going back and rereading Fishman Island in Japanese recently, I thought it was hilarious to notice that the Sea Kings talking to Shirahoshi after she awakens her Poseidon abilities are just heavily implying that the Galela tribe, they literally use the same word as, Oda then later uses to describe the Galela, also help build the Noah, and that they might be necessary to repair the damage that Luffy did to it while fighting Hody Jones. Basically, what they say in Japanese is, without this tribe or this group of workers, we can't fix the Noah. And in that case, the blueprints must have been passed down to some capable shipwrights there on Fishman Island, who eventually then passed it down through the years to Tom. Now, I personally don't think it's a coincidence that Tom's brother Den just hangs around some ancient poneglyphs all day, where also one of the road poneglyphs used to be, while just coding ships in the sea forest. I think that Tom is way more important to the story than we might have actually thought, honestly. I mean, by the way, just take a look at the tattoos on his arms. Remind you of something, and I'm kind of starting to just see that Joyboy symbol literally everywhere. Yeah, 100%. When I close my eyes, that symbol is just there. In my dreams, and in my nightmares. But you kind of gotta admit, it sure does look like Tom's tattoo is 8 circles around a big circle in the middle, and if I can get real theory brain for a second here, I'd even bet that Tom might have moved over to Water 7 specifically because he thought the time might now be coming close to when Pluton's plans would have to actually get put to use, and he really only missed that promised time by 1 generation because he personally, of course, built Gold D. Rogers' ship. He probably even inherited a lot of shipbuilding techniques from the Galela specifically. I mean, I'm sure that nobody knew how to build with Atom Wood better than shipwrights who were based on Elbaf, where we have the giant atom tree. So to me at least, it makes perfect sense that Tom and Frankie would want to build their greatest ships out of the same material, even though they themselves are not from Elbaf and actually have never been to Elbaf, but still want to get their hands on this legendary wood. Now, of course, as you know, Alabasta and Water 7 aren't the only countries involved with Pluton, because while Water 7 constructed the ship, it was actually in Wano where the ship got preserved for the future. Or I guess, as Sukiyaki would say, Wano is sleeping under the country, whatever that implies. Is Pluton alive? I would not be surprised. Whale peace is a thing, right? Now, Wano is one of the clearest examples of a country that was obviously allied with Joyboy during the Void Century, because between Toki traveling into the future from that time period, Momo's connection to Zunisha, a road poneglyph being hidden there, and the Joyboy symbol literally being part of the Kozuki crest, they're barely even hiding it at this point, right? But one thing that they did hide very well was indeed Pluton. Turns out that Pluton is so well hidden that Kaido, even after 20 years of ruling it, never figured out it was there, even after his decade-long occupation of the country, and despite Jack finding the submerged poneglyph. Now, as far as we can tell, with the ending of Wano and everything that's going on there, it does seem like the only real way to unleash Pluton into the world is to finally open Wano's borders, which, kind of raises questions about what exactly that even means. Does Mr. Zunisha here have to tear down that wall? Or why did Momo suddenly decide, based on the logbook that he got from his father, that they actually have to wait a little bit longer instead of fulfilling his father's dream right then and there when he had the opportunity? And Zunisha walked all the way to Wano, and then, bro was like, we don't need you right now, come back later, please. And, kind of like a poor Amazon delivery driver. Sorry, Zunisha. Now, in Vegapunk's message to the world, he calls out Joyboy very hard for even allowing the ancient weapons to be preserved for future use. After the Great Kingdom's loss against the world government, they had to place fail-safes around the world so that eventually the next Joyboy or next coming of Nika would be able to actually have a chance and claim victory over Imu. And I think we can all agree that probably few of these fail-safes are more important than the battleship Pluton built in Water 7, hidden in Wano, and which location was hidden in Alabasta. I mean, It kind of makes sense that they choose Wano for Pluton's hiding place, I think, in retrospect, because as Emu began flooding the world and most of the Great Kingdom and the world in general was flooded, other than the really highest points that were mountains that then turned into islands, it did mean that Wano was the best prepared spot because it's already so elevated. In fact, in retrospect, it almost feels obvious that Wano was probably intentionally built for that purpose specifically. Like, the high walls and the way that the islands are arranged don't seem natural whatsoever. It's like it was raised up to intentionally protect it from additional flooding while sacrificing pretty much all of old Wano in the process. And the islands themselves even seem somewhat artificially placed too. I mean, the 6 islands that make up Wano are from different climates. There's a funny typo in my script, by the way. It says they are from different clients, which is not what I meant. From climates. Though who knows, maybe the massive ancient giant skull that became Onigashima, you know, and might have been the continent polar ores that the smaller ores was then named after, maybe he purchased these islands from his clients or for his clients and pulled them together that way as a great vacation resort thing during the Void Century. We might just have called it by accident. Now, the overall timeline is a little bit more fuzzy on this part, since that would have had to been closer to the first world, probably, but I also think it's possible that that's exactly just how Wano was formed. And this next one, I have to admit, is a little bit of a stretch, but if you look at the way that the islands of Wano form a ring around the central island with Mount Fuji on it, which by itself is weird and special and produces the pyrobloim stuff that makes the sky clouds, you know, and also sea prism stone and stuff like that, it almost looks like that ancient giant could have been pulling them into the shape of another Joyboy symbol, but then kind of died before he was able to finish the project for his clients. Or perhaps at the early point in history here, there just weren't as many nations comprising the Great Kingdom and they just joined later on. Again, this one, I will admit, is kind of out there and a little bit tinfoil, but I think you know what I mean and why I kind of noticed it, because that symbol is freaking everywhere. But yeah, Wano might have been on that Great Kingdom juice from the very beginning. In fact, maybe the ancient kingdom's name was just Wano. But something I'm way more sure about is that I don't think Wano was just meant to preserve Pluton. I think it was meant to preserve the Galela themselves. As you know, one of Wano's islands or regions, Ringo, where Zoro's family's from, is covered in ice and snow and is literally described as the eternal grave because it's so cold there that bodies don't compose. Now, in some other theories, I've already talked about how I'm pretty sure that Moria got the body of Ors from here and that Ringo was that land of ice where Ors died. I've also even speculated that Ors might have been himself a member of the Galela, but whether he was or not, what I'm more sure about now than ever is that the Galela might have intentionally frozen themselves in Ringo, specifically so that they could be woken up later on. Or maybe just someone froze them instead and was like, gonna save you for later in the freezer. I mean, if they were frozen and ready to thaw, then they could get back into action when the promised time comes 800 years later, aka right now in the story, ready to make any additional repairs to Pluton or, which very clearly needs it, the Noah, or to build even more ships for the next Joyboy's grand fleet. Anyhow, before the Galela could be thawed for Luffy, something clearly went wrong. Someone found the frozen Galela, and it wasn't Moria. It probably was the world government or Kaido, which is why it now appears that the Galela are frozen and kept on Punk Hazard, and it very much seems like Blackbeard might get his hands on them since his Titanic captain Kuzan has spent a lot of time on Punk Hazard, specifically in the frozen part, and has a pretty convenient devil fruit, you might know, for thawing them out. Alright, we're back. Well, I personally still like a lot of the ideas in that theory, but I kind of think that if I were to actually remake it, I would probably actually add even more detail here. Since the Galela are from Elbaf, for example, I also think that they might be a key piece of the puzzle here as well. And I think it's kind of becoming clearer and clearer based on Imu's statements that Elbaf was also on Joyboy's side. I mean, they clearly worship Nika and everything, right? The entire Nika lore coming from Elbaf. I'm also still really curious about why Alabasta and Water 7 just look so similar, like you could just stack them on top of each other. it really does seem like the majority of countries that we know that were allied with Joyboy seem to have built their most important structures at this, elevated location, almost like they knew that a big flood would happen. What I've also thought about since then, though, is that if Arubana is so crazy old, it's kind of unclear whether it was always built that high. Like, if so, it could be that the flooding of the One Piece planet actually just happens naturally on some kind of natural cycle. And actually, in that context, one idea I had recently is that one reason that Imu might have wanted to erase the world's history altogether is so that those countries wouldn't be able to prepare for the floods anymore. But also, when the next round of flooding is inevitably happening in One Piece, I know just a ship that's gonna come in handy here, because see, Pluton wasn't the only giant ship that was central to Joyboy's plans, it turns out. There was, of course, also the true purpose of the Noah. The Noah, a colossal ship the size of an entire island. It's been sleeping on the seafloor since the Void Century at the very least, waiting to be used, but what is it actually supposed to be used for? I think there's a real possibility that the Noah was, in fact, Joyboy's ship, and even crazier than that, I think that the Noah might have been the ancient kingdom itself. I know, that sounds pretty out there, but consider the fact, please, that it might not be, and instead, it might just be the sauciest idea since Crocomom. Now, in case you haven't caught that Fishman Island reanimation thing and are a little bit fuzzy on the details, let me quickly refresh you on everything we know for sure about this very mysterious ship, since I recently actually reread this arc in Japanese, and what I've actually found there is absolutely wild, especially with everything that we've been learning on Elbaf. And yes, I know Fishman Island isn't exactly everyone's favorite, but it's all gonna be super important for building my case here, so stick with me for a moment. The Noah, also called the Ship of Promise by those in the know, wink wink, is a big old boat that was created during the Void Century by the residents of Fishman Island. And when I say big, I mean like island-sized big, but there's a slight problem with it, which is that since it was created during the Void Century, no one knows what the heck it's actually meant for. So up until this point, it had just been chilling in the Fishman district, collecting super wet dust for centuries, and, people building around it basically. Queen Otohime and King Neptune had a theory though, a Noah theory. They figured that its purpose was probably to bring the residents of Fishman Island back up to the surface, a theory that has become pretty popular amongst fans too, and it would kind of make sense for them to think that, because rejoining the surface world and living under the same sun again with humanity was like Otohime's entire thing. But what we do know for sure here is that the Noah was part of a big promise that Joyboy made to raise the ship to the surface using Poseidon's powers. You see, Noah's got a bunch of giant chains all attached to it because it's meant to be pulled by the Sea Kings up to the surface, but for some reason, Joyboy had to break that promise. He instead decided to leave behind a big old apology in the form of one of the poneglyphs, leaving the Noah to be raised by someone else in the far future instead. It's totally gonna be Luffy. But instead of raising it, Luffy just, punched it a whole bunch of times, because to be fair, that's kind of how he solves all problems. And at that time, thanks to one of One Piece's top tier creeps, Vanderdecken, the ship was actually about to smash into and destroy all of Fishman Island. Which low-key kind of shows that his devil fruit was kind of pretty cool. But thanks to Shirahoshi's Poseidon powers and the intervention of the Sea Kings, most of the ship was saved. But the Sea Kings were not happy about Luffy busting it completely up. They were low-key pretty stressed that it wouldn't be ready and would not be fixable in time for the promised day, at least not without the help of a certain group of people, a clan, as they put it. But they were absolutely stoked that Shirahoshi had finally awakened her powers, because they'd been waiting on the next Poseidon for a long time. And somehow it's the Sea Kings who for the longest time I just thought were these big, hungry, random sea monsters who apparently just know more about the prophecy and Joyboy than like anyone else in the entire One Piece world. So this raises quite a lot of questions to me. What was the exact promise, right? What's the Noah for? What's the Sea King's entire deal. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, right? And I think now is the time to look for answers. Because honestly, I'm like 98% certain that Fishman Island is right about to get that big Skypiea treatment real soon in the story. I mean, there's a reason, let's not kid around here, that Toei chose this arc out of all the other beloved arcs, this to fix up and re-release during the anime break, right? Because people might not have liked Hody Jones very much, but let's be real also, it gave us our first ancient weapon ever with Shirahoshi, and in general, conceptually, I'm a much bigger Fishman Island fan than I was when it first came out now. Also, the arc gave us the first ever name drop of the Joyboy, and it gave us the Noah. And where did we see the Noah again recently? Well, if it isn't my lover, my inspiration, dare I say, my muse. The mural. It just wouldn't be in a horror video, of course, without my dear. And I've got so many questions. So why is it in what I think is the first world section of the mural? Why is it hanging out with Emu and Zunisha, presumably? Why has it got a bunch of animals lined up by it, just like Noah's Ark from the Bible? That's right, Bible piece is back! No? No? Okay. But before I get all Old Testament here on you, let's talk instead about how the Noah was actually built. And, spoiler alert, this ship of course would have never been possible without the help of the Galela. In chapter 632, Vanderdecken, this guy again with the pretty crazy devil fruit, states that the Noah was built by the citizens of Fishman Island. And well, that was pretty easy, problem solved, let's all head home, nothing to see here. I guess it's always been down at the bottom of the sea and Joyboy never sailed around on it. What a foolish thing to make a video about, Manu, you could have just read the manga. Is what I'd like to say, but I don't trust a single thing that this slimy creep here says, even if he did have a famous great-grandpa. Because I'm personally not actually super convinced that it actually was the citizens of Fishman Island who did build the Noah, at least not Fishman Island as we know it today. Because how old is the current Fishman Island that we go to in the story? Let's go consider a couple of little facts here that we know. First, the sea level used to be 200 meters lower. There was just a whole less ocean for the fishmen to live in. Now, this doesn't really affect Fishman Island per se in particular, since it's under the red line at the bottom of the ocean. That space, of course, would most likely still have existed even before the Void Century. You know, the deep, deep sea, kind of like the white, I get it. But if you combine this with Otohime's dream for fishmen to live on the surface, I do think that it paints a much different picture. Because Otohime's dream specifically implies to me that the fishmen are returning to the surface. At least that's how I've always interpreted it, and especially in Japanese, that seems to be very clear. And especially in the Japanese original, it really feels like at one time, we don't know when, the fishmen were free to live in the sunlight as equal to humans, likely during the time of the Great Kingdom, since Fishman Island is clearly a country that's been allied heavily with Joyboy. And I don't know what it is, but something tells me that it wasn't until a certain world government took over and discrimination against fishermen became more widespread that Fishman Island was established beneath the red line, built there because thanks to the sunlight tree Eve's roots, it was the only place on the seafloor that could actually receive ample sunlight. Now, just to be clear, of course, it could also date back even further all the way to the age of slavery and the First World, but at that point, I don't even think that the red line was probably there either, since my running theory right now is that the red line is made out of the remains of the Hellflame Serpent, and thus of course wouldn't have existed until the end of the First World to begin with. And putting all of this together, it's actually pretty unclear when Fishman Island, as we know it, was actually founded, but I kind of feel like Fishman Island at some point, possibly the point when the Noah was also built, might have been a more amphibious society. Just think about it for a moment, right? There was a lot more land at this point anyway, since the world hadn't been flooded yet. The fishmen were probably living in the sun amongst the human beings. We've heard that from a bunch of them. And I don't know if this is my lifelong Zelda obsession talking, but I kind of like to think that the Fishman society might have been a lot like the Zora at some point, living both in water and on land, because we do know that the fishmen can do that anyways. After all, fishmen are amphibious in the story, they breathe air, they walk around, they love the sunshine, and they don't explode like a vampire when you put them in the sun. Actually, I guess vampires don't, you get the point, right? And if they weren't all the way underwater when the Noah was first built, it would have made it a lot easier for another certain group of shipwrights to help throw that specific boat together. I'm speaking, of course, of the Galela, my new best friends ever since Rocks blasted them right into the One Piece lore a couple of chapters ago. These giants and ancient giants and other people from Elbaf are the most legendary shipwrights in history. They're the ones who built the ultimate battleship, the ancient weapon Pluton. They also left some blueprints for a counter Pluton with a certain Fishman, and it looks like that's not the only ancient weapon they were familiar with, because they were hanging around with Poseidon in the day too. How do I know that? Well, when the Sea Kings showed up in Fishman Island to rescue the Noah and the island in general, they started on a huge lore drop, right? I just wasn't ready for it back then, but rereading it now in the original Japanese, yeah, they basically just say out straight that they needed the Galela, a certain tribe of people, to fix the damage that Luffy did to the ship, right? They discuss how badly Luffy wrecked the boat, hoping it could be repaired, but only by these people, only them, right, before the promised time. And they say that they needed their help, so in classic Oda fashion, there is left unspecified, though the kanji used in Japanese is the exact same one as would be used for the Hammer tribe in Elbaf as well when they're first introduced. And of course, even if they had said Galela straight out at the time, we wouldn't have known what that even meant, but again, rereading it in Japanese, the association is clear as day. But if you want even more evidence that it's the Galela, the Sea Kings worry that they won't be able to help because it's now a different age. An extremely qualified ship-fixing group from a different age that they don't know if they can come back and do anything. Yeah, let's be real, that's the Galela for sure, right? And since they're the best shipwrights around, I imagine they built the Noah in the first place. Again, just like with Pluton, it would definitely make more than sense for a group of giants to build such a gigantic ship, and it makes sense because both Elbaf and Fishman Island are also massive Joyboy allies. And then of course the Galela hanging out with the Fishman also answers another very pressing question that's been on my mind recently, which is why Tom, out of all people, had the Pluton blueprints. If Pluton was built by giants from Elbaf, you'd think that the blueprints would be passed down by the giants, maybe even as part of the national treasure on Elbaf, right? Like put it next to Ragnir and the Devil Fruit. But if the Galela were working alongside Fishman shipwrights in an old version of Fishman Island, probably somewhere else, not the seafloor, it would have created the perfect opportunity to hide those plans somewhere the world government wouldn't ever expect, actually right under their noses. The Galela probably wouldn't want their fail-safe plan to be hidden with them, which was a pretty good call since at some point they were captured and frozen solid and someone brought them to Punk Hazard, right? So they probably gave it to a very talented shipwright on Fishman Island who eventually passed it down to Tom along with the name of Galela, which explains where Iceberg then got the name Galela from in the first place. Heck, I mean, Tom's brother Den still codes ships in the Sea Forest, hanging out right by that big poneglyph that explains Joyboy's broken promise and where, the other road poneglyph used to be. And speaking of Joyboy's broken promise, what actually was it exactly? What was this huge ship meant to do? Because personally, I don't think that Otohime's guess is correct at all. I don't think that the ship is meant to bring the citizens of Fishman Island back up to the surface. I think that Joyboy had much bigger plans with it, like say, sailing on it himself and maybe, just maybe, saving the world, which he didn't manage to do yet, right? We already know that even as little kids, it's no problem for the fishmen to swim up all the way to Sabaody Archipelago. Their whole thing is that they can survive underwater. So if they really wanted to move up to the surface, why would they even need a big freaking boat to do that? I instead believe that the Noah is intended to sail on the ocean's surface. Well, I guess not sail, since it doesn't seem to be wind-powered. I think it's intended to be pulled by the Sea Kings on the ocean surface. They pretty much tell us exactly that during Fishman Island 2. And just to be clear, I think that it was probably built above the water too and then sunk on purpose in order to preserve it for the future. Which of course makes Fishman Island a fantastic hiding spot. It's hidden in plain sight, an object so old and so, like looking like a ruin that no one knows what it's actually for, right literally underneath Imu's feet at the bottom of the red line under Marijoa, and at some point it just became part of the scenery, even to the very watchful eyes of the world government, who weren't coming down to Fishman Island that often anyways. And if that's the case, then why? What do with the ship? And I can see a couple of possibilities here. First up, the craziest one, and then the slightly more realistic one. Ready? Number 1. Was the Noah actually the Great Kingdom itself? In other words, could the Noah have been Joyboy's ship? I mean, we do know that Joyboy was from the Great Kingdom and that he's the first person in the world to be called a pirate, so was he sailing around even before the world ever flooded? I'm pretty sure many of the islands on the Grand Line that we've seen used to be either allies or even part of that Great Kingdom. You can kind of tell by whether they've got the Joyboy symbol hidden in their flag or if they're hiding poneglyphs, etc., etc. And if the Great Kingdom was this huge civilization that spanned the globe, maybe Joyboy ruled over this kingdom as some kind of literal king of the pirates in like an actual king of a nation type sense, sailing through this great kingdom from place to place, bringing laughter and cheers as he did that. Now, we don't know for sure if Joyboy was a king actually or not. It could have been Davy D. Jones, the former king of the world, but I do think that the idea of him being the first king of the pirates in a very literal way would be such a neat idea. Back then, the world was just so different than what we know now, like the borders of Wano were opened and people were free to come and go. The giants of Elbaf traded with other people around the world, just as Harold and Ida would dream later on as well. The Fishmen were free to live in the light of the sun amongst the people of the surface. The Great Kingdom probably rocked for most people. And the Noah is a ship that's basically at least half the size of the entirety of Fishman Island already. It can carry a lot of people. And if at one point it traveled above the surface of the waters, it might have been like a nation in and of itself, right? Think Thriller Bark, but times 1,000. It straight up might have been Joyboy's Great Kingdom for everyone who wanted to explore, travel, and be free. It could have even developed advanced technologies through the sharing of ideas across culture and collaboration of the great minds from many different parts of the One Piece world. It could even explain beautifully how Joyboy made so many allies of nations that were so far separated and sprinkled out across the globe, right? That Noah might have docked at countries like Alabasta, Shandora, which yes was still at the regular Blue Ocean, right? Wano, Fishman Island, Elbaf, helping to exchange goods and culture and maybe technology. It may have been a truly multicultural civilization, bringing the people of the world together under one banner, the symbol of Joyboy's sun. Perhaps those different countries then started to consider themselves part of that great kingdom, or maybe the reason that symbol exists on all their flags today is even a little bit different. Maybe it's much like how One Piece countries today kind of fly the banner of different pirates. Like, you know how the Yonko of today kind of claim different territories in the Grand Line? Maybe Joyboy planted his flag in all of these places across the world to claim them as his territory, places that were thus under his protection from outside threats, for example, Imu and the other 20 kings. I think a setup like this, imagining the Great Kingdom as this nation of pirates with Joyboy as its king on top, so to speak, embodies the themes of One Piece overall as a story pretty fantastically too. I mean, Luffy seeks to become king of the pirates, spreading freedom around the world wherever he goes and inheriting the will of Nika, Joyboy, Roger, Ace, right? And what better way to represent all of those themes than creating a giant nation that literally is just as free as can be because it's always on the move. This, I think, would also actually set up Blackbeard as a really interesting contrast to these ideas, because part of his plans lately with trying to get the government to recognize Hachinoso and himself as a member nation of the world government feels like trying to become a literal pirate king in a very different sense by going through the proper official channels. Now, of course, it's probably also just his way of getting into Maurizia and taking down Emu, following in his dear daddy's dark footsteps. What a crushingly cool alliteration right there. But I also think that the contrasts are honestly there. Blackbeard has founded this stationary home base where he rules as a sort of king over his lawless pirate island, while Luffy embodies freedom by just traveling around the world, expanding his territory fairly passively. He's just like, we'll protect you, but you do you. I don't want to have to deal with anything. No taxes, no nothing. If you need me, I'll be there. And putting his allies under his umbrella of help, you know, kind of helping them become just as free as him and the crew are too. But at some point after Joyboy was defeated, the Noah might have been sunk to hide it from Emu and preserve it to use in the future. In fact, I just thought about this when talking about it, but remember how Vegapunk said that he didn't really know which side was in the right, and how we've talked a lot on the channel before in the past that if Joyboy had all these ancient weapons, there's a pretty good chance that Joyboy was the person who actually flooded the world. I mean, you could say, like I said in some other videos in the past, that maybe it was an accident and he used the ancient weapons without knowing what they would do, or like had to do it to defeat Emu and then the world flooded. A little bit of a darker and more aggressive thought could be that, you know, Joyboy flooded the world on purpose to literally expand his kingdom. I mean, if the Noah is the Great Kingdom and his pirate ship, if there is more water around, you kind of like crush all the other kingdoms who are fighting against you and expand your territory like by a ton. Did we beep that? Okay, cool. Yeah. So just an idea as well. Now, the big hole that I see here, besides Enies lobby, is that the Great Kingdom was also supposed to be super technologically advanced, and the Noah, here at least, whenever we see it, definitely seems like a pretty normal, as if, you know, still a marvel of engineering, but you know, it's not exactly great. It's just a normal wooden ark. No crazy lasers inside anywhere, but to be fair also, for a technologically so advanced kingdom as the Great Kingdom seems to be, not much of its technology seems to remain anywhere. I mean, Vegapunk apparently found some bits and scraps that he used to inspire his own, as he says himself, inferior inventions. Emeth the Iron Giant showed up from who knows where, guided by who knows who to attack Maurizia 200 years ago, and by all metrics, he doesn't look that insanely advanced on the outside either. So wherever he and any other remaining Void Century tech are actually hidden, it must be really well hidden. But we really don't see much of the technological marvels of the Void Century anywhere in the world, even on the seafloor presumably, where we've seen ruins of some of the older civilizations that got flooded. So I personally don't think that the lack of cool lasers or rocket propulsion on the Noah disqualifies it immediately from its association to the Great Kingdom either. But of course, as cool as this idea could be, it's just one possibility. One of the other prevailing theories about the Noah I've seen floating around is that the Noah isn't meant to save the Fishman. Instead, it's meant to save everyone else. And for this, it really just comes down to a little bit of my favorite thing, mythology. The first big hint here, I think, is that the ship is quite literally called the Noah. That's right. Bible Peace is back after all. If you weren't Sunday school maxing like me, let me tell you a little story. There was once a man named Noah, and God commanded him to build a big ark, like the biggest ark of all time. Why? Because God deemed humanity a failure, so he decided to hit the big do-over button in heaven. You know, a totally normal thing to do. He was gonna flood the entire world and create a global reset. So Noah was commanded to take 2 of every animal along with him in the ark while the world flooded. Just not the dinosaurs, sadly, they didn't qualify. And after the flood subsided, he and his family then went on to restart all of humanity together. Little fun fact here, I'm gonna go on a side rant. I have a, let's say, weakness for alt history stuff. So even though I'm not saying any of this is true, I have like a fascination with people who dug into like, there might have been more advanced civilization in our world. And as you probably know, because I've talked about it on this channel before, chances are pretty good that there was a real flood, a real giant flood, roughly 10,000 or 12,000 years ago in our real world that might have inspired the Noah story, because the story of Noah and the big flood and someone building a ship and kind of carrying on, civilization and, people coming and bringing civilization back after that flood subsided, that story exists in pretty much every single culture on the entire planet. So, kind of cool, fun fact there. I kind of have been intrigued that One Piece mirrors like these speculations and like this alt history stuff that potentially in our planet there might have been a more advanced civilization that got wiped out in a giant flood, and then, we're just kind of like rebuilding and only some fragments got left from what they actually knew. Just so you know why I'm so excited about this, because I love it when it becomes very apparent that Oda is into a lot of the conspiracy stuff. I think that's super fun. Aliens, Hollow Moon, the ancient civilization that's been lost in the flood. Oda is using all the stuff and putting it into One Piece. Are they actually gonna reveal the Marijoa files? We'll see. Now, this connection with the Noah and mythology is kind of enforced by the mural too. Right by the big elephant that I'm just gonna assume is Zunisha, right, is a ship that looks pretty much exactly like the Noah with a bunch of animals walking alongside it. But since I've been interpreting this half of the mural as the first world, is the Noah actually way older than we all think? Is there just another similar ship even older than the Noah instead? Or is this part actually showing already part of the second world and the Noah was used to save animals or people from the first flooding? And then, after it was used, it would have been sunk down to Fishman Island, though that doesn't really line up with the timeline of Joyboy's promise, so I really don't know what it's doing on the mural, honestly, unless the mural is showing what was supposed to happen, but not everything went according to plan. I don't know, man, but what I do know is that the biblical Noah story and the One Piece flood line up pretty much perfectly. I mean, already there are a crazy amount of One Piece parallels, right? The global flood, Emu, who considers himself a god wanting a great cleansing of the people, right? But Noah's task specifically might be telling us what the ship named after him is actually for. It's to save people from the big next flood. Now, you know who doesn't need to be saved from a global flooding? The sky races. But you know who else? A species that can literally breathe and live underwater. Like, if anyone's gonna be a-okay during Emu's wettest dream come true, it'll be the Fishman and the merfolk. But all the people left up on top on all these islands, well, they're gonna need some real help. As all the remaining islands become submerged and there's literally nowhere else to go that's not underwater, other than the Red Line and maybe some big bridges, the Noah could save the day, carrying everyone through until Emu's defeated and the ocean gets drained somehow, I guess. Which does raise the question also of where all this water is even coming from, because I'm not sure that the One Piece world has polar ice caps, yet alone ones big enough to sink the whole world once they melt. Though thinking about it, didn't Buggy and Shanks have that discussion in like chapter 5 when we get that first Buggy Shanks flashback in Orange Town? Aren't they debating about the North and the South Pole? So I guess these exist, and I think I even remember that Oda answered in an SBS that the North Pole is colder, like Shanks was right or something. So I guess that means there are poles and ice, like a North and a South Pole in the One Piece world. Which means, are the ancient weapons just used to nuke the poles and cause global flooding that way? Anyways, the Noah traveling around the world to save people would also be a super cool way to revisit all the places we've come to love throughout the story and bring some of our favorite characters back for the final war. We could kind of speedrun a world tour of the Grand Line, getting a chance to see everyone once again before the end. It would kind of be building Luffy's own big kingdom on the Noah, right? Potentially being an actual pirate king and king of all these people that he's freed in all these nations. And then we could have this like very epic panel where Luffy stops by all the islands, right? And then the last island, wherever that would be, he just stops maybe, at his hometown, Fuchsia Village, when the entire wave hits and we see all these previous places. Alabasta, Dressrosa, right? Cocoa Village, like all of these things just get crushed under a giant tsunami. Pretty epic stuff. But we also do run into another problem if that theory actually turns out to be true, because, well, it once again doesn't really fit with Joyboy's apology and the promise that he made to the people of Fishman Island and the Mermaid Princess specifically. Let's remember what we know about this mysterious promise again. The promise Joyboy made does have to do with using Poseidon's powers to raise the ship back to the surface. And we know that whatever it is, the Sea Kings are absolutely stoked about it. They saw Luffy punching their favorite big boat and said, no, absolutely not. This simply will not do. And honestly, the Sea Kings just raise a whole lot of more questions about the whole thing. Fun fact, I've been wanting to make a Sea King video for a while, and we were kind of like in the team discussing it, and we're like, no one's gonna want to watch a Sea King video. So I put it in here because I really wanted to talk about this, and it kind of ties in perfectly with the Noah since the two are connected. Have you ever wondered how the Sea Kings are so long-lived? Highly intelligent, like sentient human-like beings. They have language, can communicate. You just need the voice of all things to actually hear them. They were also super thrown off, by the way, when they noticed that Luffy and Roger seemed to understand what they were saying, since in their minds it should have only been Poseidon. Which, of course, should really remind us all a lot of Zunisha. Luffy can hear them through the voice of all things. They also only take commands from the royalty of another Joyboy-affiliated nation, either Momo or Shirahoshi in this case. And Shirahoshi is the ancient weapon Poseidon, so there's a human component here, a creature component, and a vehicle component. You have probably heard this idea before, we've talked about it on the channel, it's been out for a while in the community, but it does kind of make you wonder if Momo and Zunisha are somehow connected to the ancient weapon Pluton, beyond it just being hidden in Wano and Zunisha needing to break it free. Just like Zunisha has been waiting on edge for someone to please give me an order, the Sea Kings were pretty much elated that the next Poseidon had finally awakened and learned about their powers. They imply that they'd been waiting hundreds of years for the two sovereigns to meet, hoping that this time things could play out better than during the Void Century. So who are the two sovereigns? Is Luffy, the future Pirate King and reborn Joyboy / Nika, one of them? Is Shirahoshi the future Queen of the Sea one? And right now, my money would be on Loki, rightful heir of Elbaf, to be one of them, since it seems like he and Shirahoshi, or should I say Mosa Mosa, are pretty sweet on each other, my favorite couple. And don't worry about it, we'll just ignore the very problematic 47-year age gap here for now, since, you know, giants age well, I guess. Could the Sea Kings actually be cursed, just like Zunisha is? But instead of Zunisha's endless marching to nowhere, could the Sea Kings be cursed to terrorize the seas, specifically the Calm Belt, in order to artificially maintain the Grand Line and prevent people from entering and exiting from points other than Reverse Mountain? Are they there to protect this entire concept? Because very clearly the Grand Line wasn't made by the government, because the, Marines only very recently with the help of Vegapunk figured out how to even cross over the Calm Belt themselves. I mean, I've speculated before that Zunisha might have been a real person at some point, and maybe even a member of Joyboy's crew. So were maybe all the Sea Kings just people who were then cursed and transformed into sea monsters? That would be incredibly messed up and incredibly cool, actually. Or do their serpentine designs just call back to the times that dragons existed, when they were worshipped as gods? I mean, again, we've got the celestial dragons who claim to be gods. We've got all the Joyboy affiliated countries that worship serpents or dragons in some way, shape, or form. Are the Sea Kings those dragons, right? There's just so many possibilities to know for sure, but I just need to know what these guys actually are. All right, sorry, Sea King tangent over. They kind of got me distracted here a little bit with how edgy and mysterious they are. They're exactly my type. But back to Joyboy's promise and apology. If the Noah is for saving the people of the surface, then why apologize to Fishman Island? Right? They're like not the ones who are gonna drown. So is it to bring the Fishman back up to the surface after all? Was I just wrong? Well, as my close personal associate, the Taco Bell Chihuahua, once said to me, ¿Por qué no los dos? What if the Noah's gonna save the Fishmen and the normal other things and tribes and races on top of the world, right? And maybe even Skyman. Jury's still out on them. They feel like they're pretty much chilling up there. Now, back during the Fishman Island arc, Madame Charlie predicted, of course, that Luffy's gonna destroy Fishman Island, and since he has literally no actual reason to do that, the prevailing theory has been that Luffy, at some point, is gonna destroy Marijoa and the Red Line during the final war. And since all of that is, of course, right above Fishman Island, and Fishman Island kind of sits in this cave of the Red Line, it will also be destroyed in the process, technically by Luffy in a very prophecy by association kind of thing. So what if step 1 of the plan is to get all of the fishermen on the boat and then have the Sea Kings pull it up to the surface, avoiding the cataclysmic destruction of their home? That would also fulfill Otohime's desire of bringing the fishermen back to the surface to live under the sun, just like everyone else. Though I do want to point out that that scene specifically, in Japanese, Otohime uses the katakana and not the kanji for the word sun, kind of like a name. So I personally really think that they're talking about Joyboy and Nika here, because they're more in the Japanese saying, oh, living under the sun god, right? The person, the sun, more so than the sun, the star, or object in the sky. So there's like some sneaky Joyboy stuff hidden there in the Japanese too. But then step 2 of this plan, save everyone else. If it's final wartime and the Great Flood is happening while Luffy's also fighting Emu and possibly bringing down the world's last continent, then the people on all the other islands will also need some rescuing. And this would actually give things a little bit of a poetic flair too, because despite all the oppression that the fishermen have faced, they'd be the ones ultimately saving all of humanity and the other tribes. Like, there's a trace of Fisher Tiger's relationship with Koala going on there too. No matter the race, all of the Blue Planet's people were ultimately slaves of Emu and the Celestial Dragons. So I personally could absolutely see the Noah's role playing out kind of like that in the very end. I would probably cry a little or a lot. Okay, you got me. I'd cry a lot. And of course, it's also a little bit difficult to figure out the timeline on all of this because Joyboy was not able to fulfill the promise, presumably because he was defeated in the war or something else did go wrong. Maybe he got betrayed or Emu just had another ace up their sleeve. But then again, he did have enough time to write the entire apology letter on a poneglyph, which, as we know, means one of the Kozuki people. Poor fella had to like chisel that entire letter in. So it also kind of had to be before Lily allowed those to spread throughout the world. So it's kind of unclear when the promise was supposed to actually happen. All right, welcome back. Now, this is yet another theory here where in retrospect, watching it again now, I might have actually added some more Elbaf connections given the ties between Loki and Shirahoshi, right? If the Galela did build the Noah as well, and they're from Elbaf, then the old Poseidon and the war god Elbaf, you know, Loki's predecessor who also ate the Nidhogg fruit, who also wielded a giant hammer, which, you know, the Hammer clan and the Galela, and they might have also been very close back in the day too, for all we know. And even though I'm not sure if the Noah being Joyboy's actual ship at one point works as perfectly with the timeline, that theory of this huge traveling country on a ship led by Joyboy is still an idea that I kind of love and that I think kind of lines up really well with him being the first pirate, but in this era of crazy advanced technology and everything that was going on back there, right? But also, if the Noah wasn't the capital or the actual Great Kingdom itself, then another wild theory I have that kind of ties into this is that Fishman Island itself could have been at least part of Fishman Island, because honestly, when you look at it, it kind of feels like it's not always been there. It's more like someone took some parts, put them in a bubble, and placed them at the bottom of the ocean. The true purpose of Fishman Island. I bet that you've never actually really thought about it that much, but Fishman Island is actually really weird. It's an artificial country made out of 2 giant air bubbles, basically, for an entire race of people who can very easily breathe and just straight up live underwater. It's hidden right underneath the world government's main seat of power, surrounded by the giant roots of the Sunlight Eve tree that bore into the seafloor around it, supplying the entire island with light. And inside of that second smaller bubble, the Yugu Palace itself gets even stranger. It's not made out of giant shells like most of the other Fishman Island architecture, because architecturally speaking, it almost looks like it has much more in common with Wano looking like a very much traditional Japanese palace. It even has a massive giant golden dragon surrounding it at the top. And of course, we even have a massive giant symbol of a sun right on the giant gates of the palace. But then, in front of the palace itself, hidden very sneakily by Oda actually, but visible very much on purpose in a bunch of key panels during the arc, this massive circle of 8 pillars surrounding a central plaza, another big circle, which I don't need to tell you, of course, is of course the spitting image of Joyboy's symbol. Only that when you actually take a closer look right here where Kami is swimming by with Nami, you will see that this is actually not a plaza at all, but instead a giant gaping black hole leading to what exactly? Well, today I want to find out together with you not only what is in that hole, but also why I think that Fishman Island probably wasn't always where it is today, where it might have actually come from, and why I think that, what we see of Fishman Island and especially its palace might have been taken from somewhere else and just hidden pretty much under the nose of the world government. And not only that, while potentially one of Joyboy's biggest secrets might have been hidden right here in plain sight and none of us ever realized. But to get started here, I think we first need to establish why Fishman Island obviously has such massive ties to Joyboy and to the Sun God overall. The fact that the Yugu Palace was built in honor of the Sun God has pretty much been staring us right in the face this entire time, I think. And it makes a lot of sense. This arc, Fishman Island, is where we first got the original Joyboy name drop. Lore-wise, it is just undoubtedly one of the most important arcs too. I actually just made a video about the Noah and the Sea Kings and the ancient weapon Poseidon and Pluton and everything specifically, but I do think that Yugu Palace is hiding so many more secrets that I kind of needed to make a whole separate video just about this. And it really shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to say that Fishman Island was of course once at the very least allied with Joyboy. And of course, Fishman Island was also telling us about Joyboy's connection to the sun a very long time before we actually even learned about the Sun God or Luffy's real devil fruit for the very first time, ironically, later on in Wano. We'll get to that. But again, there is that big giant sun right on the door. There's Joyboy symbol in the plaza right before you enter the palace. And while Fishman Island doesn't really have a flag of its own, we do see it very literally in the Sun Pirate symbol founded by Fisher Tiger after being freed from Marijua with, a little bit of help from my man Shanks. While imprisoned as a slave in Marijua, it's very likely that Fisher Tiger there learned for the first time about the legends of Sun God Nika. Legends of this godlike figure has of course spread amongst the enslaved people in the One Piece world throughout the ages, as we learn from Who's Who, and with the goal of fighting for equality for his own people, Fisher Tiger then adopted that very same symbol of the sun. Historically, of course, the fishmen have always faced strong discrimination from humanity, even being enslaved by the celestial dragons, and for centuries they've really just dreamed about wanting to rejoin the surface world and live under the same sun as the rest of the world's people. They've been fighting for freedom, so it's no wonder that in the Void Century they ended up allying with Joyboy, the incarnation of the sun god Nika that brings freedom and laughter wherever he goes, the god whose slaves pray to for freedom. Very ironic then, or maybe fitting, that even without Fishman Island having its very own flag, Luffy's flag is the one that's now flying over the island since he has actually claimed it as his own territory, which, as we will see later in this video, might just be, Oda foreshadowing that Fishman Island originally was Joyboy's or the Sun God's country anyways. Either way, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. This country is getting its absolute crazy Nika representation. Once again, this island is allied with the Sun God, and it's very ironic that the new captain of the Sun Pirates, Jinbei, would now also literally join Luffy's crew, dissolving a crew that was inspired by the Sun God in the first place. But what's especially weird to me probably is that while Fishman Island is the name of the island, it is not in fact the name of the country. The country is called the Ryugu Kingdom. And as an FYI here, Ryugu means Dragon Palace in Japanese. It's not the Mermaid Palace, it's not the Fishman Palace, it's not even the Sea King Palace, it's the Dragon Palace specifically. And as I've been noticing a lot lately, Nika and dragons always seem to come hand in hand. What I really strongly believe here though is that it's the Ryugu part of the Ryugu kingdom that's especially important, and to really understand what I'm getting at here, we've got to dig into the kanji, the Japanese characters that Oda uses for the Fishman country. For starters, the name Ryugu is taken from a myth about the Dragon King and his palace under the sea, which appears in a bunch of different folktales throughout, Japanese mythology. I've been reading up a lot on all that recently. And the first kanji, Ryu, as you probably know from, Loki or from, Kaido, Ryu is just dragon. Instead, it's the gu part here, this kanji, that I'm very curious about. Because gu can mean palace, but it also is usually more commonly translated as the imperial capital, which kind of has me speculating that this palace might not only have been part of the Great Kingdom, it might have straight up been associated with its ruler, and the palace itself that we see now in Fishman Island could have been the capital ruling palace of the Great Kingdom, and whoever ruled it, whether that's Joyboy or Davy Jones or both or someone else, they could have lived here before it was hidden, and then the Merfolk dynasty moved in instead. Also, gu is also the kanji that refers to the imperial prince or princess, so Joyboy, as we've speculated before, might have just been the prince from the ancient kingdom. But before I get into all of that, I first have to acknowledge that, again, the Ryugu Kingdom is named in large part due to that Shinto mythology thing. So it's time for a little bit mythology with Manu, so we can actually see how Oda took inspiration from this very popular and very important myth, and the ways that he then wove it into his own story before we then connect it to the larger One Piece lore surrounding Nika specifically. But there is a central one that I want to focus on, and that tale begins with a fisherman, Urashima Taro. One day, this fisherman saves a sea turtle who turns out to be actually the daughter of the Emperor of the Sea, the dragon god Ryujin, who, if we kept track, is a literal sea god. The dragon god wants to thank Urashima, so another turtle gives him a lift to his underwater kingdom, the Ryugu Palace, and the sea turtle that Urashima saved is now revealed to be the beautiful princess Otohime, the same name as Shirahoshi's mother. He visits her for roughly 3 days, but tells Otohime that he's gotta get back to his village to take care of his aging parents. They actually get married in that time, which is kinda crazy, but even though she doesn't want to see him go, she gives him a magical box to protect him that is called the Tamate Bako box, but warns him that he must never ever open it. However, once he gets back to his village, everything has changed completely. It's been only a couple of days, but his mother is gone, no one had ever heard of Urashima Taru, and it turns out that in those 3 days at the bottom of the sea, his parents have disappeared, and when he tries to tell people who he is, they do remember that a fisherman of that name once lived here many years ago. So it turns out that in those 3 days that he spent at the bottom of the ocean, 300 years had actually passed on the surface. And in his grief, Urashima then opens up the Tamate Bako box and instantly ages those 300 years, becoming old and dying right then and there. He then hears Otohime's voice telling him that she told him not to open the box because inside it was his old age. It had kept him perpetually youthful despite all the many years that had passed. Now, I hope that on the surface, the One Piece connections here are probably pretty obvious. We've got an Otohime, we've got a Ryugu Palace, and we've even got the Tamate Bako box. And personally, I've been saying for a while now that the Tamate Bako box has to have some kind of connection to Joyboy or Nika, because what happens when Luffy goes Gear 5 and awakens his devil fruit? That's right. His hair turns white, his eyes turn red, and he gets super powerful. And what happens when someone eats any of the holy energy steroids from the Tamate Bako box instead? Same thing. Their hair turns white, their eyes turn red, and they get super powerful, and the side effects are the exact same too. After Luffy comes out of his Nika transformation, he's temporarily at least a super old man. And after Hody Jones and his gang used the energy steroids, they also aged up several decades. It's kind of as though somehow back in the day, Joyboy or Nika imbued his own powers into pill form and gave it to Fishman Island as a treasure to help protect them in dire need. And there's actually precedent for that kind of thing too, since Joyboy also stuffed a bunch of his own haki into a knot stored inside of Emmet. My boy Joyboy is indeed giving away his own power to his homies business, confirmed. How exactly they put the Nika fruit in pill form, I don't know. But hey, again, the Great Kingdom was supposed to be this crazy technologically advanced civilization, and according to Vegapunk, even devil fruit seemed to be a sort of technology, so why not turning some powers into a pill as well? After all, everything that Vegapunk does is pretty crazy, and he says it's not even close to what they were able to do back in the day. The thing is though, I don't believe for even a second that Oda named his undersea kingdom the Ryugu Kingdom just because of this one myth. Obviously, Oda pulls from all kinds of mythology for everything in the story, but this one specifically, I think, goes way deeper than just that. Let's look at the facts. We already know that Shirahoshi is Poseidon, a literal ancient weapon, and we know that there is an entity called the Sea God, who's one of the 4 gods who may or may not be Poseidon or related to them, since that's the Greek god of the sea, of course. Now, it would be very funny if King Neptune turned out to be the literal sea god of One Piece despite his bad back, but at this point, we just don't know who it might be for sure. It might be a character we don't even suspect at all. As you probably know, recently I've been on a big kick speculating that the actual sun god Nika might have been a dragon. I specifically thought that he was this giant dragon on the mural fighting against the Hellflame Serpent. Unfortunately for my agenda though, this dragon actually appears to be the Nidhogg, which Loki of course has eaten the devil fruit for. However, that still doesn't change the fact that allied countries of the Great Kingdom have a huge dragon obsession. They all really seem to have worshipped or at least have some sort of mythology around these creatures, and that makes a lot of sense because in Eastern mythology, dragons have traditionally always been associated with the divine, just like the Ryujin, the sea god dragon from the Urashima Taro myth. And really, it's a massive common factor in a lot of the mythology that Oda's pulling from, and seeing the big Joyboy symbol in front of the Ryugu Palace, right? 8 pillars arranged in a circle with the dragon statue overlooking all of them. Something actually clicked when I was rereading all of Fishman Island. Does each of the Joyboy allied countries represent one of the 8 pillars of the Great Kingdom? And if that's the case, it really starts making a lot of sense that basically in every Joyboy allied country, we see dragons or serpents of some way, shape, or form. And while it does seem like dragons and serpents are very different, of course, in a lot of mythologies, it turns out around the world, the term dragon and serpent or snake, they get pretty interchangeable. Elbaf and Wano specifically are full of dragons, especially now with Loki having the massive Nidhogg fruit, and on Shandora we saw people worship a giant serpent as a god as well. Even on Alabasta we see a giant serpent depicted in the hieroglyphs in the Tomb of Kings, and these very random Japanese dragons in the bathhouse that have it's just one random frame at the end of Alabasta, which took me by a lot of surprise finding that in the manga. So you might be thinking, nah, not on Zou, and I will admit, Zou is kind of a weird one here. They've got a whole whale tree going on, and as you probably figured out, whales are not dragons. That was news to me. Neither are elephants, but aren't you forgetting about the legend and best One Piece character, Ryunosuke? May my boy rest in peace. But that brings us right back to Fishman Island and its dragon palace. As I already said in the intro, this place looks like it should be way more from Wano. It uses that traditional Japanese architecture. It's even got a giant, massive golden Kaido up on top. Again, I think this is very weird and out of place. It could be the Fish Palace or the Turtle Palace, but it's the Dragon Palace specifically. And as we just said, the Great Kingdom clearly had a big connection with dragons. So putting 2 and 2 together here, was the Dragon Palace on Fishman Island originally somewhere else, and was it actually the Nika Palace? It has Joyboy symbol built into the architecture right out front. It has the sun. I think there's a good possibility that the Dragon Palace was actually Joyboy's palace, or was in some way connected to the Great Kingdom and its worship of the sun god Nika, the place where the sun god ruled over the Great Kingdom. Is it diving into crackpot theory mode a little bit too much to say that Joyboy or Davy Jones or whoever ruled the ancient kingdom lived under the sea? Well, yeah, because why would Joyboy want to live under the sea? Why would he live under the red line? Well, that's because I of course think again that this palace, and really the entire island here, was not always down there to begin with. If part of Neptune and Otohime's goals were to live on the surface in the light of the sun again, it kind of implies to me that there was once a time in history when fishmen were just able to live on the surface. And it was only once they were forced under the sea due to discrimination that Fishman Island was founded in its current location. Fishman Island was built where it's built right now because it's the only place on the seafloor that actually gets sunlight thanks to the roots of the massive sunlight tree Eve. But again, we know that the fishmen don't need air. Why build everything inside these air bubbles? And back in the day, I kind of like to imagine that the fishmen were pretty much amphibious, living in a semi-aquatic society where the sea levels were a lot lower, which makes sense since they can also, of course, breathe air and just casually live on land. Again, that's why it really doesn't make sense that Fishman Island is at the bottom of the sea anyway, that the palace might not have been built by or even for them originally. These guys can live on land and also underwater just fine, but were then forced to live under the ocean at the very bottom, where otherwise it's just pitch black darkness. Perhaps Otohime's dream to live under the sun is actually inherited from a time when the fishmen did live under the sun god. After all, she does talk about the sun in katakana, not in kanji, which is again like one of these Japanese things. It's two different alphabets, but basically the way Oda writes that sentence in Japanese makes it sound like Otohime is talking about the sun as a person, much more in line with Nika and Joyboy and not like the actual star. That would also explain, by the way, Joyboy's apology letter to Poseidon, because that would mean that his promise to have the fishmen live back under the sun, under his rule, you know, he couldn't keep that promise because he lost to Imu. So Otohime's dream would be to bring the entire country back up to the surface where it originally came from and reunite it with the Great Kingdom. And when she says she wants her people to live under the sun, the katakana here could again still imply that a sun god should return as a ruler, as the Sun Emperor, again for the Imperial Dragon Palace. After all, in Japan, the imperial family here of the Emperor is actually said to be descendant from the sun god Amaterasu as well, being part of the lineage of the sun god. So I think it makes absolute crazy perfect sense that One Piece's sun god lived here at one point as well, and that his descendants are actually the real rulers or the rightful rulers of the One Piece world, just how it is with the Japanese imperial family. My point here being that I think the Yugu Palace was probably originally a place that belonged to Joyboy. At this point, they might have been a part of the Great Kingdom, the Fishmen, or were at least closely allied with it, and as a historically oppressed group, they likely worshipped the sun god Nika, a god of freedom, who was a beacon of hope for the enslaved and kind of had that as part of their religion. But you might now rightfully be asking, how do I go from that to Joyboy himself might have lived and ruled from inside that Yugu Palace? I mean, this palace could have been the capital building of the Great Kingdom for all that we know. I mean, there are a few ways I think we could very easily get there. Now, the timeline gets a little bit fuzzy because we actually just do not know when Fishman Island was actually founded in its current state at the bottom of the red line, only that it had to be after the red line itself had already been formed. So, first option, the old palace was destroyed and the Fishmen rebuilt a new version of it on the newly founded Fishman Island. Maybe something very closely resembling the Yugu Palace was originally above the surface, was much bigger, and it's where Joyboy lived in the Great Kingdom when he wasn't out doing pirate stuff. And then after it was destroyed in the Void Century War or sunk after the flood and the Fishmen relocated, they could have erected a new one based on it, kind of keeping Joyboy's memory. The original one might have been in Wano, in the original Wano, which is why it has such a Japanese-inspired architectural style. Or the Great Kingdom might have been such a diverse place that it combined aspects of that style with the building materials that could be found underwater, giving it kind of aspects of both cultures. If what we speculated on in my last video on the true purpose of the Noah, if that was right, and the Noah might have been Joyboy's actual ship, maybe he sunk his ship down there personally and promised Poseidon that he'd bring the Fishmen back up to the surface as soon as he kicked Emu to the curb, which actually, yeah, that would make a lot of sense because he might have hidden them down there, asked them to protect everything, and then just lost. Option number 2. Was the Yugu Palace literally the same one that Joyboy used to live in, and they just moved and hid the entire thing underwater? Let's be real, stranger things have happened. This is the series where a Shadow Man turned a whole island into a boat after all, so maybe a previous Pawpaw Fruit user sent it all the way over to its current location to be kept safely under the bottom of the sea by allies of Joyboy. Honestly, there are tons of different devil fruits like Laws or, even Luffy's, even Joyboy himself, who have fruits powerful enough to move an entire building. Maybe it was even moved because the Fishmen were forced to live underwater and moving it down there served two purposes at the same time. It protected the palace and the Noah from the world government and also gave the displaced fishmen shelter and a purpose. Now, of course, I will admit that it's not 100% necessary for this idea that Joyboy actually had to live there anyways. It could be even older than Joyboy, as the Dragon Palace, maybe it was actually built to honor and worship the actual original sun god Nika before the second world. Or, I've also speculated before that it wasn't Joyboy who was the king of the Great Kingdom, it might have been Davy D. Jones, and in that case it would be especially fitting that the palace and the fishermen got moved to the bottom of the sea in Davy Jones's literal locker. Another possibility though is that it was where it is currently, it was just a lot higher. Maybe it was originally on top of the red line and somehow it was transported to the bottom. Maybe a former Ope Ope no Mi user croomed it all the way down Big Mom style. After all, I do kind of think that a palace to Nika on top of the red line where the previous gods lived in the Holy Land makes a lot of sense anyway, where now the new celestial dragons lived, right? I have a feeling that originally the top of the red line belonged to Joyboy or the Great Kingdom anyway, since the Lunarians used to live up there and we know they worship Joyboy to some extent too, and they were known as the previous gods before the current ones and potentially also called themselves celestial dragons. So maybe when the loss just couldn't be avoided, they sent the palace down beneath the red line for safekeeping. Or it's just way older than even that, and after the first world, the red line was actually built on top of it, or I should say the Hellflame Serpent died on top of it. It doesn't quite work with the idea that they build it in its current location to receive light from the Sunlight Eve tree, but since history being actively erased is, a pretty central part of One Piece in general, we can't exactly be certain that the characters have those facts right either. Heck, maybe Nika or someone back in the first world specifically planted the Sunlight Eve tree on top of the red line so that it could eventually deliver light down to the ancient Nika palace, known as the Yugu Palace originally too. A lot of options here. What I'm pretty sure about though is that no matter where the Yugu Palace is from originally, is that its dragon theme is because it was an ally of the Great Kingdom and its original inhabitants worshipped the sun god Nika. And I'm fairly certain that one day the sun will shine on it again unless it's gonna be destroyed by a falling red line. In that case, the sun will shine on the fishermen again and they can make a cool new unsmashed palace instead. But instead of being boring and looking at the future of this palace, who cares? I want to take a look at the past again. Back when the Ryugu Palace might have been in the capital of the Great Kingdom, what did it actually look like? What was this palace actually meant for? And that now finally brings me to our plaza out front and our mysterious hole with these 8 pillars forming the Joyboy symbol. Because I got a feeling that it's not just there for decoration. It's just too weird that there's a giant dark black pit in the middle of it for no apparent reason, and why have it in front of the entire palace if we only barely get to glimpse at it? And when there is a hole around, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm gonna get to the bottom of it. And with all of the magic summoning abyss circles that we've been seeing Emu and the Holy Knights break out recently, well, it kind of gives me a very interesting idea. I just really can't get those 8 pillars specifically out from my head because, you see, I've been loving the final season of Fire Force recently. If you're not familiar with that series, it's got 8 pillars of its own. It has its own lost, destroyed previous civilization, our civilization, which I loved that twist. I kind of wanted that twist for One Piece. We got it in Fire Force. If you saw that episode, crazy mindfuck moment. But yeah, TLDR, 8 pillars that are very important to the entire end of the series, bringing the end of the world. And I think One Piece's 8 pillars might be hiding some massive secrets as well, because I'm pretty sure both series are pulling from the same real world mythology. Manu, more mythology! Yay! Okay, in Chinese mythology and cosmology, there's also a concept known as the 8 pillars. These are literal, real-world mountains across the Asian continent that are thought to hold apart the earth and the sky. It actually ties heavily into feng shui practices and the idea of the Bagua. You can enjoy a whole different level of crazy watching that later, because for now I really want to take a little bit more of a literal interpretation here. We do know from Vegapunk's message to the entire One Piece world that the existing islands of the One Piece world are actually mountaintops from the original continent before the entire world got flooded by 200 meters. Meaning that all these ancient structures were originally at the tops of mountains. Everybody had to move to the highest ground possible, so all of these 8 pillars, just like the real world mythology, might be 8 mountains spread across the One Piece world. The 8 countries that then allied with Joyboy and the Great Kingdom could have been on these 8 mountaintops. They are the 8 pillars holding up the world, the old world, which is why they'd be represented here at the Ryugu Palace if that was the capital of the original Great Kingdom. If you're wondering what those 8 kingdoms might have been, I have a pretty good guess for 6 out of 7 of the pillars. Alabasta, Shandora, Fishman Island, Zou, Wano, Elbaf. After that, as you can see, I'm still missing 2, but 2, 7, you get it, 2, right? Those could be islands we meet later in the story, like Lodestar or Laugh-Tale itself, or they might be groups we've already met in the story, but who had less of a clear connection. I mean, the Tontada are represented in the mural alongside Joyboy, so they could be a pillar. We don't know what their original home country was because they actually had to flee to Greenbit like 1,000 years ago. And Water 7 is actually another possibility, though I'm more inclined to believe that while Water 7 was probably founded by allies of the Great Kingdom for the purpose of building Pluton, I don't think it necessarily has to be one of these 8 allied kingdoms. Ohara had of course a poneglyph and one of the oldest structures with its tree on the island in the One Piece world. Was it one of the 8 pillars too before it was destroyed? I mean, I already talked about how Ryugu Palace might have been literally relocated from its previous place on the surface, so maybe it was once a mountaintop, one of the 8 pillars of the world, but the people were forced down to the surface instead. Maybe the Minks had to take up residency on Zonicia's back, as we know they did, because their own homeland is now also beneath the sea. The 8 pillars that held up the world, the 8 mountain kingdoms and the Great Kingdom, have been torn apart from their original locations in order to survive, and in their place, the world government took over and imposed a new world order. And the idea that a lot of these are moved from their original positions gave me another really crazy idea, but one I think might actually just be possible. What if the Joyboy symbol itself isn't just a picture of the sun? What if it's a picture of the entire planet? All of the confirmed Great Kingdom allies so far are of course located in the Grand Line, so if we just turn the globe so that the Grand Line is lined up with the circumference of the planet, like this, right? Each circle would be one of those pillars spaced evenly across the entirety of the Grand Line. I mean, the Grand Line is already weird enough by itself, and we're not exactly sure where each one is on the map anyways, and we're even less sure about their original locations pre-Void Century, so I think it's possible that the 8 pillars could have literally been placed in this kind of special arrangement. It's not just a flag, it's a map, very similar to the current world government symbol, which of course is kind of inspired by the Joyboy symbol and also seems to show the 4 blues and Marijua in the middle. The fact that there are 8 of them specifically in the Joyboy symbol could also even mean that they stand for the cardinal and ordinal directions, each of these places in a different sector of the world. You know, kind of how like the Revolutionary Army has a representative for each blue. You know, Belo Betty's got the East Blue, Karasu the North, and so on and so forth. And I've been speculating before also that the world government might be using their giant bridges to form some kind of crazy big abyssal transmutation circle across the whole planet, kind of in the shape of the world government logo. Could it work in a similar way if the 8 pillars were placed back in their original locations? Basically forming a big actual physical Joyboy symbol across the entire planet, and if that's the case, what would it actually do? Wait, hold on. That might actually explain, funnily enough, one of One Piece's weirdest and biggest mysteries. Zunisha. If the world government's goal is to separate the 8 pillars out of their proper alignment so that the symbol is broken, then what if that's why Zunisha's punishment is to walk on forever? Could whoever commanded Zunisha to do that thing have done it so that Zunisha and the Zou wouldn't be lined up with the other pillars? It could be the same for why the world government forced the people of Fishman Island under the sea. They're in the wrong place by design. And if the Joyboy symbol is some type of transmutation circle like the Abyss uses, could that be what the hole in front of the Ryugu Palace is actually for? Is it meant to summon something? If the Ryugu Palace did used to be in the capital of the Great Kingdom, perhaps it was used to teleport members from the different allied nations to the palace from around the globe. You know, for meetings of the allied kings, there were 20 kings on Imu's side, maybe there were 8 on Joyboy's. We do know, after all, that they were crazy super technologically advanced. Again, this isn't like super sci-fi stuff, so it's not exactly unheard of. So what is the deal with that massive hole right in the middle of the 8 pillars? It's not just a circle on the ground, it's a giant abyss, black thing that we can't see into at all. So what might be hidden inside of it? It's just such a weird detail for Oda to put in there when it could have just been a flat circle or a place, but it's so deliberately drawn as a hole. Why? Well, if I'm rolling with the transmutation circle theory, maybe if the 8 pillars are realigned across the Grand Line, it might unlock something there, which could actually be pretty perfect placement since right now it's directly underneath Marijua. Maybe they relocated down there so they can use the palace to shoot up a big laser thing or something. Or we're down in the bottoms of the sea in Davy Jones's locker. So is it a secret grave for either Davy Jones or Joyboy, or could it even be where Davy D. Jones is imprisoned, some kind of gateway to another dimension, or even the abyss itself maybe that could be unlocked if, everything is kind of put into place Zelda style. Maybe the Sea Forest isn't the only place with a poneglyph and they've got another one hidden down there. Or another possibility that I think is kind of fun, because I've been thinking about this like separately for a bunch of different videos and have been trying to wrap my head around how this might be. In every depiction of the sun god Nika or Joyboy, right? he's depicted with a shield and a sword, or in the Nika case, with a sword and a spear. So could the sun gods and or Joyboy's weapons actually be hidden down there beneath his old palace right in front? And perhaps these weapons hold a special key to finally taking down Emu for good. I mean, I'm still very curious if Luffy actually has to use a sword and a shield at some point. Is the end of One Piece just a big race to see which faction can line up their pieces correctly first? Either the bridges will be completed and Emu can just unleash the abyss upon the entire planet, or the Great Kingdom's pillars can be reformed and realigned and seal it away, or otherwise allow Luffy to fight back against Emu and unlock something crazy. That would be kind of insane. And it could even tie into the idea of putting the world back together in one piece, the Joyboy symbol, because right now everything is out of order, not aligned, but the One Piece is maybe just moving Zanisha back in the right location. This is a random idea I literally just had while talking about this, and I don't really have any evidence for it, but it could be kind of interesting, again, thinking about the fact that these aren't like, you know, Stone Age civilizations, but we are talking about a crazy sci-fi lost civilization in One Piece with high technology. Could it be that the 8 kingdoms or 8 mountaintops, you know, that belong to Joyboy's kingdom, could it be that they had some sort of beacon or some sort of other secret technology hidden underneath the country, very much how Pluton is supposed to be sleeping under Wano, that's been kind of hidden away? And kind of they need to be activated to do something crazy. I mean, it's kind of been weird how Wano has the massive Fuji thing and Water 7 has the giant fountain. Like, we have all these really tall things. Maybe there are some hidden artifacts inside all of these that actually need to be, you know, aligned in the right way. That could be the same thing with the trees, where we have the whale tree on Zou, where literally one of the road poneglyphs is hidden. We have the giant tree on Elbaf, the giant tree on Ohara, etc., etc. Like the Eve tree, and, you know, the Eve tree could literally be part of this too, or maybe that was the center or something. Like, you know, there's enough big objects that could be hiding some crazy big technology that's super old. And so currently the globe might have been torn apart by Emu, but only Luffy and his allies can put it back together, or Joyboy tore it apart to prevent Emu from using that technology in their favor. Alright, this one I like a lot. Looking back throughout that video, I mentioned offhand a few times that it might not have been Joyboy's castle, but maybe Davy D. Jones's instead. And honestly, I would probably make that a way bigger point now if I were to revisit this theory like today. The fact that it's sunk down and hidden away at the bottom of the ocean, at the bottom of the red line alone, I kind of think is a dead giveaway that's probably more likely than the alternative. Though also, until we know what exactly the relationship between these two characters was, and of course also their relationship with Emu, if there was any, I won't be super sure on it quite yet, but it's just like a option that I want to throw out here. I'd also dig deeper, I think, into Otohime's words about living under the sun as a person. It's yet another thing that I've thought about a lot since the last few months that I did mention it in this video. But the fact, again, that in Japanese it sounds so much more like she's referring to the sun god instead of like the star in the sky, I think it ties it even closer to Joyboy, but again, the weird thing that everyone and their mom wants to be the sun god too. But also, as has become very clear, I hope, throughout this video, is that Fishman Island is by far the only country, nor maybe the most important one, that seems fundamentally tied to Joyboy. I actually believe that there's also another country that was founded specifically to ensure Joyboy would come once again, and that kind of breaks the entire circle and really puts us past Void Century into preparing basically the entire road for Luffy, and why Amazon Lily has not only become so randomly important now with, you know, everything we got during the God Valley flashback, but also why it was Luffy's destination, yeah, I guess that makes sense, during the time skip and, you know, getting sent there by Kuma. So next, let's talk about the true purpose of Amazon Lily. Amazon Lily is one of the strangest countries in all of One Piece, having sat isolated within the Calm Belt, protected by the giant sea kings for hundreds of years. and Oda recently very suddenly put them right back in the spotlight during the big God Valley incident. You know, was God Valley actually just a repeat of what actually happened on a much larger scale during the Void Century, with Shaki hinting that Nefertari Lily was the cause of the entire Void Century war? As you probably know if you watch the channel regularly, I'm a very big fan of the idea that after that cataclysmic war, Alabasta's queen, Nefertari Lily, mysteriously disappeared because she founded the country of Amazon Lily. Why? Well, could it be that she needed to keep a child safe? A child that she might have had with none other than Joyboy himself? I actually think that she might have founded a country to straight up carry on Joyboy's lineage after spreading the poneglyphs, and also Joyboy's will. Again, poneglyphs, Amazon Lily. A country who would choose only the strongest and best men to father their children. Children, by the way, who just so happen to have a very natural, powerful affinity for great hockey feats. And I don't think it's a big surprise. I mean, think about what type of people we've seen the Kuja tend to fall for. Roger, Rayleigh, Luffy, Dragon, the Kuja Pirates' Jolly Roger even hints at this connection to Joyboy as well. On it, we can see 9 snakes in a circle around a big round skull in the middle. You know, could these be representing the 9th secret Joyboy ally, an extension of the 8 circles in his symbol that only established itself after Joyboy, of course, had already lost the war and thus was never part of his official symbol. And of course, snakes are a massive part of the entire country's culture. Snakes that could connect to the monstrous Hellflame Serpent on the one hand, but especially to the dragons that we see being worshipped as gods throughout the Great Kingdom and the other allied nations of it. As you'll see, there's even a famous Japanese myth of the so-called 9-headed dragon that ties pretty perfectly into Lily's story too. And as you can probably tell at this point, I am incredibly pumped to share with you everything that I found out recently about Amazon Lily and why I think that the entire island was actually created with one goal in mind: to preserve Joyboy's legacy, a legacy, of course, resulting in the second coming of Joyboy, in other words, Monkey D. Luffy. But before we can get to that idea and the endgame of this specific theory, we've got to first start all the way back at the beginning with, again, Nefertari D. Lily. The disappearance of Lily. Now, you might have already heard me talk about the idea that Amazon Lily was, of course, founded by potentially Nefertari Lily in other videos in the past, but it's really the basis for all of the ideas I'm going to be talking about in this specific video, so let's very quickly go over that theory first, just so you know where we're coming from. As the Queen of Alabasta, Nefertari Lily was, of course, one of the 20 original rulers who ended up founding the world government and, becoming the 20 celestial dragon families. However, something changed, or something happened. Nefertari Lily was the only of the 20 monarchs who did not remain within Mauresia and instead chose to return home to Alabasta. Only that she never actually returned there. Instead, her brother then took the throne, and Lily's name was never again recorded in the history of the country. However, she did manage to leave a letter behind to her family signed with her true name, or perhaps at that time her new name, Nefertari D. Lily. And of course, Lily ended up turning out to be the person who actually spread Joyboy's poneglyphs around the entire One Piece globe. Now, Emu, whether just being badly informed or taking a huge whiff of copium, referred to this as a great mistake, but obviously we're gonna need that Void Century flashback to get all the correct answers, but from what we do actually know, it very much seems like there might have been a little bit of a love triangle at the center of the Void Century between Joyboy, Lily, and Emu. And so, for whatever reason, despite initially being on Emu's side, she turned traitor, working alongside Joyboy to make some preventative measures for the future, for right now when we're reading the story. Now, the Kazuki clan of Wano were actually the people who created the poneglyphs to begin with, and somehow Lily allowed them to be distributed across the world, being given to countries or places that would protect them as part of their national identity. Afterwards, Lily was supposed to return to rule Alabasta, But again, she never came back there. That one letter and the poneglyphs were pretty much all that was then left of her legacy. Or was it? Because I don't think that's the only part of Joyboy's legacy that actually survived. You know, with how much Luffy recently seems to look and even sound like Joyboy based on hints we've gotten from both the manga and the anime recently, I do think that Lily and Joyboy might have had a child together, and Luffy, as a result, might just end up being Joyboy's actual direct descendant 800 years later. We're going there. We're being romantic in this video. And I don't think that Lily, of course, was killed by Emu and the world government. I think none of us believes that. Emu's too down bad for her to get rid of her, right? He has that big creepy painting and shrine to her. But Emu also seems like the type of person who'd absolutely want to get rid of Joyboy and Lily's baby. I mean, we've kind of had a precedent for that with Roger and Rouge, right? And so Lily might have just ended up going into hiding. Returning to Alabasta would make it super obvious where to find her, so instead I do think that it makes perfect sense that she could have founded a completely new island in that newly flooded world that would raise future generations to prepare for the coming dawn, Amazon Lily. Whew, okay. One thing at a time now. Before I try to convince you that Luffy is the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of Joyboy and Lily, first I think let's talk about why I think that Lily even founded Amazon Lily as a country to begin with. The founding of Amazon Lily. The most obvious evidence, of course, for the idea that Nefertari Lily founded Amazon Lily is all in the name, of course. Lily and Lily, it's the same name. Case closed. Despite spelling one with an I and one with a Y in the official English translation, why would Oda give the same name to this character and the island? And in case you're wondering, in the Japanese, they're also pretty similar. I mean, one is just Nefertari Lily, and then there's Amazon Lily, and Amazon Lily has like the slight elongation at the end, so like theoretically it's Lily and Lily. It's the same word, is all I'm saying, basically. I mean, even with like 1,400 plus named characters in the story, when has Oda ever given the same name to multiple characters or places? It's actually like 3 times, but they were all really minor side characters that didn't even need a name to begin with, which I, by the way, recently learned the really hard way in my most torturous video yet. If you haven't seen that one, was fun though. But the only time that I can really think of that an island and a character share the same name is Dr. Vegapunk and Punk Hazard. And turns out that Punk Hazard was of course Vega's old laboratory, so there was a very clear connection where the island was named after the character. We also know that Elbaf might be named after the warrior god of the island, Elbaf, and of course, who could forget the classic character, Jeremy Dressrosa. If that's the precedent we're setting, it makes the Amazon Lily and Nefertari Lily connection seem even clearer than it already is just by itself. But that's of course not the only connection. Both the island and the queen are named after a flower, the lily, but actually every single resident of Amazon Lily is named after a specific flower species, from common, obvious ones like marigold and daisy, to then some which actually take a whole botany degree to recognize, like Boa Hancock herself sharing another name for the Shonald coralberry, a flowering shrub, by the way, in case you were wondering. And where do we see a prominent portrait of Nefertari Lily, by the way? Oh, right, in Emu's flower room. And with Emu's crush being that obsessive and creepy, clearly Lily had to go somewhere that they'd never follow. And where's the hardest place on the sea to get to anywhere? Well, Laugh Tale, of course, but where's the second hardest place on the sea to get to? That would be the calm belt. This might not seem that obvious now, where like everyone and their mom is just going through the calm belt, it seems, but there is no wind there, so you can't sail. There's also the problem of it being infested on purpose, it seems, because they're intelligent, with sea kings who are protecting the Grand Line, so no one can easily approach anyway unless they're very heavily armed and ready to scrap. And since it's only been Dr. Vegapunk who very recently developed coating marine ships with sea stone to like kind of camouflage them and, you know, trick the Sea Kings into not recognizing the ships, the government didn't have that technology for a very, very long time again, we're talking like 10, 15, 20 years in the story max. By the way, another case where I'm just like, Vegapunk, what were you doing? Why are you gearing up the government like crazy if you're not on their side? I don't get it. Anyways, the thing is, it's kinda perfect really, because Lily's allies would be able to reach Amazon Lily very easily. After all, one of Joyboy's confirmed homies in the Void Century was the former Princess Poseidon, who conveniently can of course command the highly intelligent Sea Kings. So the Mermaid Princess from 800 years ago could very easily have traveled through the Calm Belt to and from Amazon Lily, and honestly thinking about it, she might have even just been the person to ask the Sea Kings to guard the, the entire Calm Belt, which probably was just created at the end of the Void Century anyways. I've been a fan of the idea that maybe it wasn't even Emu, but Joyboy who flooded the world, which would explain the entire Vegapunk saying he doesn't know whose side was right because they both did crazy things. Maybe Joyboy flooded the world to prevent Emu from doing whatever they wanted to do, and then established the Grand Line that way, protecting his former kingdom, and asking Poseidon to actually command the Sea Kings to protect the Grand Line, making the only actual official entranceway Reverse Mountain, basically. Point being, Lily definitely could have created Amazon Lily in total secret, but I could also see a world where there's a small collection of Void Century survivors who could have traveled back and forth from there and kept in communication with Lily, thanks to Poseidon, again, maybe even thanks to the Sea Kings. But for now, I kind of want to operate on the idea that she actually founded this country in total secrecy, because communicating to the outside world would have maybe been way too dangerous and potentially given away her location. And to be fair, I mean, she probably would have needed to bring at least a few things along anyway, and a few other people, right? Since you can't really found an entire island country solo, you know what I mean? One question I do still have though is that if this is all really accurate, then why doesn't Amazon Lily have another poneglyph? Well, the answer probably is because they were all distributed before Nefertari Lily ever claimed it as her new hiding spot. But then again, maybe there is a poneglyph that Boa Hancock knows about, and that's gonna be relevant again maybe later on in the story when Boa and Luffy are inevitably gonna reconnect at some point. And I gotta say, even though I kind of liked Oda's no romance thing and Luffy doesn't care for women kind of stuff, at this point, I would be kind of happy, honestly, to see Luffy end up with Boa Hancock. I'm just gonna say it. A little bit of romance at the end of the story, I would absolutely be there for. But hey, maybe I'm alone on that ship. And so even though Lily was hidden from the entire world, even from her own family, she would then found a country that would carry on Joyboy's legacy, his very bloodline, into the future and prepare for the next person who would awaken the sun god Nika fruit. But why then am I so certain that Amazon Lily has this connection to Joyboy anyway, even if Lily founded it? Well, it all starts with the Jolly Roger. For the Kuja Pirates flag, it seems that Lily explicitly chose a symbol that would hide the secret alliance kind of in plain sight. By founding Amazon Lily, she added a 9th circle to the Joyboy symbol that we're very used to from so many other countries around the world, or in this case, a 9th snake, because as we know, snakes are very much tied to Amazon Lily. The snakes on the boats are actually the only reason they can travel, because the Sea Kings fear them, or maybe there's like a pact between them. Again, that's like the way that they actually get around the Calm Belt without being eaten. Also, of course, we know that all of Alabasta has a bit of a snake woman thing going on. We have Cobra, quite literally, who's associated with Vivi, who's Lily's ancestor. So we already have the entire snake and queen princess thing going on anyways that we have on Amazon Lily too. The 9th circle. So as you probably know, the flags of many countries we have seen and talked about who are allied with Joyboy always seem to contain his symbol somewhere hidden inside of them. Joyboy's symbol is inside the Kozuki crest of Wano, the Alabasta flag in Fishman Island, etc, etc, Shandora, you get it. Secretly showing that these countries, who all have poneglyphs, were once allied with the Great Kingdom / Joyboy during the Void Century. Also, at this point, we do know that it is Joyboy's symbol because we literally see it on his shield in the second world. And of course, this symbol shows us one big circle surrounded by 8 others, which I like to imagine represent 8 countries or 8 sections allied with the Great Kingdom, or even making up the original Great Kingdom, kind of like 8 prefectures, right? And I do kind of wonder why exactly the Alabasta flag does retain the Joyboy symbol, since they were supposedly on the other side of that war. Were they originally allies with the Great Kingdom and then joined the world government? Did Lily's letter include some kind of, info about keeping the symbol in the flag? Or is Alabasta's flag itself just so old, dating back to the first world, that Joyboy maybe got that symbol from them? Is it? I mean, it is the oldest known country in One Piece so far after all, so it could also just straight up be Nika's symbol and Joyboy adapted it. At this point though, we just don't know enough about the full timeline to be sure, so, all we need to know is that Joyboy was tightly connected with this symbol. So instead, let's now turn our attention to the Kuja Pirates Jolly Roger right here. It's a skull, a very round skull, with 9 snakes spiraling outward from it. Lily might have been founding the 9th secret allied country, a hidden 9th circle in the Joyboy symbol, but then why the snakes? Well, first off, Kuja itself means 9 snakes. That's literally written on the giant rock mountain thing on the island. It's just the kanji for 9 and snakes. So on one level, it's just very literal. The tribe is called the 9 Snake Tribe and the flag are 9 snakes. But why snakes? Well, lately, One Piece has just been full of dragons and serpents. You probably have also been realizing, looking at Loki, right? I'm kind of starting to think that this serpent and dragon worship goes all the way back to not just the second One Piece world, but probably the first world, to the clashing of titans in the mural. Nidhogg, who's a dragon, and the Hellflame Serpent. Was the worship of Nika, Nidhogg, and the Hellflame Serpent actually central to the Great Kingdom, maybe? We do know that dragons and serpent-like dragons were real in the One Piece world and are like the pinnacle of what everyone wants, and in almost all of the countries affiliated with Joyboy and the Great Kingdom, we do see some kind of iconography dealing with either dragons or serpents. It's kind of weird, honestly, that we typically see just one or the other, though it is important to note that in a lot of world mythologies, and actually just dragon mythology overall, dragons and serpents are basically interchangeable and just like different fluent categorizations, even though we often consider them to be pretty different depending on the culture you might be from. And this is especially true, I think, in Eastern countries where mythological dragons are often depicted to be a lot more serpentine. Just look at Kaido's big, long, snaky body. And since the residents of Amazon Lily worship snakes, they do fit in very perfectly with some other old nations like Shandora, who also happen to worship a giant serpent as a god, who was representative, of course, of the 4 gods that we now know are part of the Harley text as well. Amazon Lily in particular might even be connected to a mythical serpent that I mentioned earlier called the Kuzuryu, a 9-headed snake that's a rain deity, just like one of the 4 gods named in the Skypiea flashback again. And if you look at Amazon Lily, the mountaintop of the island is literally a giant multi-headed snake that is either carved or might have been petrified. And I feel like the first instinct would be to say, they probably carved it out of the mountain at some point, but with all of the massive mythological serpents that we've been getting in One Piece lately, I would not at all be surprised if this thing used to be alive. Also, it turns out that this myth of a 9-headed dragon actually appears multiple times throughout Chinese and Japanese mythology. There are multiple myths of different lakes, like for example Hakone, which is this very nice onsen, region with like some active volcanoes that's very close to Tokyo. Super nice. If you ever travel to Japan, you should check it out. It's one of my favorite places. Onsen everywhere, great food, beautiful nature. There's a ropeway and an active volcano that actually erupted like a couple of years ago, so the top is like all charred. Long story short, that there is a lake in like on the top of the mountain of Hakone, which is like an actual volcanic crater. And that lake, which has a shrine in it, has the myth that a 9-headed serpent lived in there, and the same goes for some other lakes throughout Japan too, that have this myth of a 9-headed dragon living in them, and the story always goes kind of the same way, that this dragon used to be evil and terrorize the people until it gained enlightenment and then actually became good and a guardian deity. Which actually would kind of work well with Lily's story, who, originally was fighting with Emu, presumably against Joyboy or against the Great Kingdom, but at some point got enlightenment, turned good, and then actually worked more as a protector, protecting Joyboy's legacy. And I mean, obviously, I've also speculated before that the Hellflame Serpent could be encased inside of the Red Line. Maybe the same thing that turned it into stone also got this thing here stoned. I mean, maybe it was done in by the end of the first world when the planet was covered in flame and darkness and ash, right? Or, given its location, maybe this many-headed monster just, saw one of the previous users of Boa Hancock's Mero Mero no Mi and was turned to stone that way. After all, it would not be the serpent that we've seen who's kind of a little bit horny, I guess, for lack of a better word. But this is still far from the extent of Amazon Lily's full snake worship, because these guys go all the way in. Many, if not almost all the residents have their own pet snakes, basically, like Boa Hancock Salome here, also named after a genus of flower, by the way, and their ships are also pulled, as I mentioned earlier, by these giant snakes. Obviously, being in the calm belt, there's no wind for sailing with ships, so they needed some other method. But again, these snakes also are the mechanism that kind of keeps the Sea Kings away, and it does also remind me a lot of the Sea Kings pulling up the Noah, which we see during Fishman Island, and which they tell us is their job, which I think might be another little piece of evidence and foreshadowing for a connection between Lily and Poseidon back during the day, connecting, of course, through Joyboy. These snakes are called Yuda, by the way, and, they are so fierce and mostly poisonous that the Sea Kings don't mess with them either, and I kind of feel like that idea for ship propulsion definitely could have been shared between Lily and Poseidon back in the day. And of course, as I've already talked about earlier too, we kind of have the snake connection to Alabasta as well, where we have King Cobra, right, who's kind of representative, presumably, for Lily's brother, who then took the throne, named after a snake. We have this mural depiction down in the catacombs where the poneglyph is hidden, which shows a giant serpent as well, so there are a lot of connections here. But the question still remains, why go ahead and found an entire new nation instead of just going into hiding? To prepare for the next Joyboy, to prepare for Luffy. So, how did she do it? Preparing the next Joyboy. Obviously, part of Lily heading to Amazon Lily instead of going back to Alabasta was because her life was presumably in imminent danger and she needed to disappear. She was also on a secret mission, but going through the trouble of founding an entire country on a new island seems like a very, very long-term plan. So I kind of have a feeling that there's something much, much deeper going on here. I think that Amazon Lily was founded in preparation for the final war against Emu, because as we know, the final war is still going on and has never actually ended. Something that we learned very recently in the manga. First off, this is a nation of hockey-trained, powerful warriors. To be fair, nowadays in the story, when basically anyone and their mom, can use hockey at a fairly decently high level, this seems a lot less special, but throughout the entire world, hockey, even basic armament or observation hockey, are a crazy rarity. Don't forget that there are still very much members of the Straw Hat crew itself who seemingly can't use any hockey. However, hockey usage is very common and even just broadly accepted and established within the Kuja tribe, with even the weakest of their warriors infusing it into their arrows and giving a pre-timeskip Luffy a crazy tough time, a Luffy who'd already at this point toppled 2 warlords. In fact, the Amazon Lily arc was basically the official introduction of hockey to the entire series. I mean, I guess we'd seen some hints at it before, mostly through Shanks, like him with the Sea King, or Shanks walking onto Whitebeard's ship, which is still one of my favorite scenes of any hockey ever. But this was the place where it fully was explained and defined as a second power system, and we see Luffy use his Conqueror's hockey. So Nefertari Lily built a nation of powerful warriors who would stomp most of the world's armies, and especially just the average Marine soldier. Hancock herself is strong enough to hold her own perfectly at Marineford and has been confirmed as a Conqueror hockey user. She can probably beat someone like Blackbeard, sure, but he's also Blackbeard. He's like final villain of the show, almost as important as Luffy material. Then there's the strict isolationism. Amazon Lily was able to remain separate from the world government and develop independently, raising new generations of warriors. That's of course until Vegapunk then, again, for some reason thought it was a good idea to develop the Sea Stone technology and give it to the government. Only at that point was Hancock actually forced to become one of the 7 warlords, because now the Marines could just come and knock at the doors of the islands whenever they wanted. And actually, quite conveniently, that is perfect timing for her to get involved with the next Joyboy. And it's that next Joyboy where the full reasoning for Amazon Lily starts to become a lot clearer, I think. And I'm not even talking about Luffy yet. He's only the latest person, I think, in a very long line throughout the centuries to inherit that Joyboy will. For starters, I'm talking specifically about Nefertari Lily's potential child. I mean, I think the main reason she was laying low was because she was going to have a baby, Rouge style, hiding it from the government, a baby that Emu would rather see gone. I think that before the end of the war, before Joyboy finally got defeated, she was already pregnant with his child. You know, McQueen, kind of Game of Thrones style, but hopefully a lot better. Hopefully they're not related. And I think the fact that this has precedent in the story already with Ace and his mother Portgas de Rouge, Ace, by the way, who we think Roger was trying to breed into the next Joyboy anyways, kind of could be a big piece of foreshadowing. After the King of the Pirates' death, the world government went on this mass execution spree, which I kind of tend to forget about because it's such a dark thing that they did, just to ensure that Roger wouldn't have a kid. And this story, of course, was also actually inspired by a very similar story in a Bible piece. Surprise! You thought I couldn't sneak some Bible piece into Amazon Lily? You thought wrong. So, when Jesus was born, King Harold ruled over Judea, and since the prophesied Messiah threatened his rule, he ordered the massacre of the innocents. What a nice name. Yeah, that's what I call my evening meals on Friday night too. The execution basically of all male infants under 2 years old, just like with the world government in One Piece. But a few decades later, when Jesus actually started his ministry stuff, Herod's son, also named Herod, good naming scheme by the way, he was in charge. Jesus was baptized by a prophet named John the Baptist, and later on, Herod's daughter dances at his birthday banquet and is granted one wish, and prompted by her mother, demands the head of John the Baptist. And that daughter, the granddaughter of the King Herod who demanded the massacre of the innocents, her name was Salome, the same name as Boa Hancock's big snake. Turns out that snake shares its name with a flower and a biblical character. This could kind of link the idea of Portgas de Rouge pregnancy and Amazon Lily even closer together. Or it could also just be a massive coincidence, but it was a coincidence that I totally think is cool enough to just throw in here, and you can let me know if it's dumb or cool. Either way, Amazon Lily and Lily's legacy, it's all about the one thing that kind of defines the entire country, the love sickness. Alright, yeah, it's about time we talk about this in the video. This is such a strange thing that happens to pretty much every Amazon Lily Empress. It's almost like a generational curse. The Empress position isn't even through a familiar line, weirdly enough. It's given to the most beautiful and powerful warrior. So I'd kind of understand it if it was some like genetic thing, like with, you know, Momo and the Kozuki, or Poseidon like Shirahoshi, and like that being handed down through generations. But it's almost like a kind of curse that specifically inflicts whoever the chosen leader of the nation is, who's then supposed to kind of get it on, I guess. Like, it's kind of as though Lily's undying love for Joyboy is being passed on to her successors. Or just the dream to continue Joyboy's lineage. But how does that even work, you ask? Let me talk about the birds and the bees. It's time. I've made this channel for 8 years now. We gotta have the talk. Well, I guess technically I do not know how it works mechanically. My dad still hasn't talked to me about that. But what I do know is that Oda's been all about love lately. We're getting characters introduced like my man Scopper Gaban and Shepard Summer and Sanji, whose, you know, whole philosophies are just based on the idea and power of love. Our favorite cook here has been riding that love train pretty much since day one, and in the God Valley flashback, the entire conflict centered around the kidnapping of Shaki, another former Amazon Lily Empress who also felt that same love sickness for my favorite character, Rayleigh, and of course I guess there was also Zebek's love for his family and his wife and son. I've kind of thought for a while now that something similar to the Shaki kidnapping could have very well went down during the Void Century, but with Lily being in that role instead. Maybe imprisoned or, like just kidnapped by Emu, but then freed by the one who won over her heart, Joyboy. Some classic love triangle action. Now, of course, Lily then didn't just have the next Joy boy because all the infants born on Amazon Lily are girls, so I think that Lily instead had a little Joy girl. No, not Sophie, different Joy girl, and generation after generation, the Empresses of Amazon Lily would inherit the love sickness, fall in love with men that are very powerful and have some desirable traits, like being part of the D-Clan, I guess, and continue that Joyboy line or perish. Now, obviously, there must be several different matrilineal lines running through Amazon Lily. By the way, did not know that matrilineal was a real word until I was, working on this video, but especially since the Empress position is not inherited by birthright, I still think it's possible that some of these lines could still trace their origin all the way back to Nefertari Lily and Joyboy anyway. And you just have a couple of family lines that all trace back to Lily that actually keep getting the throne basically, because they produce the most beautiful ones, right? Because Lily was beautiful and so on and so forth. I kind of think the whole love sickness idea might be a form of literal inherited will, but based on Nefertari Lily's love for Joyboy. Just look at who the Empresses always fall in love with. Gloriosa wanted Roger, the future king of the pirates, one of the absolute monsters. The man who actually found Laugh Tale. Shaki was down bad for his right-hand man, Rayleigh, who also made it to the final island and was said to be incredibly close to Roger's true power too. And Hancock, of course, fell heads over heels for Luffy, literally the next Joyboy and future king of the pirates. All these guys have a very specific taste in men, I will say, and it always happens to be people who are about to find the One Piece and reach the final island, who have been kind of in touch with the poneglyphs and all that stuff. Also, I guess they all had the straw hat, which is kind of fun, but I kind of think that whatever the love sickness really is, it's the reason that Amazon Lily was founded anyways. It's very much, a curse that was probably part of the entire project that then became the civilization of Amazon Lily. Now I'm gonna quickly change directions here completely, but you'll see where I get with this. When Ja Rule just revealed the true nature of Loki's devil fruit recently, that it could only unlock its true potential when eaten by an ancient giant because it, kind of scales with it, and that it was a fruit whose user was chosen by Ragnir only when someone was deemed strong and worthy enough to eat it, it kind of got me thinking that there must or might at least be other fruits where someone's lineage really, really matters. Now, Luffy's family is without a doubt crazy important and unique. I mean, the monkeys stay monkeying, they're like all absolutely insane and do not just seem like a regular family looking at what they produced. Like Luffy, Garp, Dragon. Something is flowing in those veins is all I'm saying. And of course, we've got a ton of other important clans and families in the story too, right? The Davy clan, the D clan. So there really seems to be some sort of genetic trait associated with some of these lineage factor, Vegapunk, that's really important for fulfilling Joyboy's ambition. Which would especially make things really crazy if, say, Luffy's mom was from Amazon Lily, something we've been talking about recently, making him not only a D-Clan member, but also potentially a direct descendant of Lily and Joyboy. Oh, wait, we've talked about this. We already think that Luffy's mom is from Amazon Lily. I think that Luffy is the whole legacy of Project Amazon Lily. The legacy of Amazon Lily, Monkey D. Luffy. Introducing Tritoma, Empress of Amazon Lily after Shaki and before Boa Hancock. Now, we've already theorized that this is Luffy's mom ever since her introduction, right? Actually, before her introduction, because I first thought this after she was name-dropped in an SBS, and Why do we think this? First off, she's got this little 6 shape on her hair. Combine this with the 5 on Young Dragon's backpack when he's a Marine, and you get 56, no, not 69, 56. Gomu, the number that Luffy is constantly associated with. Like all of these here, right? And then there's the fact that Kuma sent Luffy specifically to Amazon Lily out of all places he could have sent him. Why there? Well, maybe because he knew that that's where Luffy's mom is actually from, so he could get in touch with his roots. I mean, Kuma would be in a position to know who Luffy's mom was because he was one of the only and closest people to Dragon in the Revolutionary Army who even knew that Luffy was Dragon's son. But Manu, you now cry, Tritoma can't be Luffy's mom. Gloriosa said she died from lovesickness. And yeah. Like in chapter 522, when we first see Hancock succumb to the, lovesickness condition, Grandma Gloriosa, who got the glow above the century in the Rocks flashback, states that the previous Empress and the Empress before that both died from the lovesickness, but that's just straight up a lie because the Empress before Tritoma was Shaki, and Shaki, last I checked, was doing pretty great, living it up with Rayleigh. So if one of the 2 people that, Gloriosa claimed died of lovesickness actually just ran off with a man and opened a bar, why not both of them? I kind of think that Tritoma fell for Dragon, another D-Clan member who wants to bring down the world government, which is very on brand for the type of people the Empresses usually fall in love with, especially if we connect it back to Lily, who might have been in love with Joyboy. Also, now just that I think about it, we've got a snake princess together with a character named Dragon. I mean, if I'm right about the Great Kingdom having something to do with both snakes and dragons, there we might have something right there, and the Monkey Clan itself might also be important, but we just don't know quite enough about them going back generations to figure out how they're actually connected. But again, the Monkey family is gonna turn out to be special in some way, shape, or form. They're all too crazy. And either way, you kind of get the son of Garp and an Empress of the Kuja together, and Luffy has some crazy lineage as is, especially if we're right about the Kuja themselves possibly being descendant from Lily and from Joyboy. Then they ran off together and had Luffy, and since Tritoma was no longer on Amazon Lily, she was actually able to give birth to a boy, not a girl. I mean, most of the women on Amazon Lily leave the island, do their thing, come back to give birth, and it always ends up being a girl, so maybe this is because of something that Lily did, or some crazy technology on the island, or maybe just good old-fashioned storytime magic. Now, did Tritoma actually die after that? Almost definitely, because we do know how Oda feels about keeping moms alive, but at the same time, he has said that we have seen, Luffy's mom in the story before and that she should be alive, so there's already a lot of really conflicting information out there. Now, thanks to Kuma, Luffy actually found his way home to connect with his roots, with his mother's side, roots filled with a bunch of snakes and a hardcore tribe of warrior women. It was the place that he learned about hockey and first used his Conqueror's hockey. It's a place that's connected with the biggest mentor of his journey, since Rayleigh is with another former Empress of Amazon Lily, Shaki, so I really think it's no coincidence that Luffy and to some extent Rayleigh have been the only men actually welcome in Amazon Lily in like centuries, potentially ever since it's been founded. If Luffy had not been sent here specifically, he never would have been able to make it to Impel Down or Marineford in time ever to even attempt to save Ace, getting his biggest spurt of growth from that moment. You probably remember, but Amazon Lily was a very short arc. It even seemed more like a setup arc, really. But right under our noses, Amazon Lily might have just been the single most important place in all of One Piece, because without it, the story might just have never happened to begin with. And so the true purpose of Amazon Lily wasn't just to give Lily a hiding spot or to raise an army against Emu and, protect some of Joyboy's secrets. The true purpose of Amazon Lily might have been Luffy all along. Alright, so I'm gonna be honest here. At the very least, the part of this theory about Lily founding Amazon Lily, I think this is one of my favorite theories in general that we've been talking about in the last couple of years, right? Like, this one just feels like one that makes so much sense, so many people have pointed it out, to the point that this is basically my headcanon until Oda says something otherwise. It just seems to make way too much sense. Now, as for all the other stuff about intentionally trying to create the next Joyboy, that stuff is a little bit more out there, I will say, but I can still very much see it being the case. I'm still definitely on Team Tritoma for Luffy's mom right now, but this next video is a little bit older than the other one, and I still think it fits insanely nicely into the overall theme and building towards, you know, what Joyboy's big plan and his big empire actually looked like. You might remember this video where we talk about what's at the bottom of Enies Lobby and what's at the bottom of the hole. Is Enies Lobby the site of the ancient kingdom? There is a massive deep secret surrounding Enies Lobby, and I'm gonna get all the way to the bottom of it with you today by the end of this video, finally uncovering what is really going on here. And yes, I do mean literally to the bottom of that massive chasm here. That's right. Enies Lobby isn't just a great arc, some might even say the best arc in One Piece. It is also maybe the single most mysterious location in the entire story and has insanely deep roots going all the way back to the time of Nika, the time of Joyboy, and could have been one of Oda's greatest pieces of foreshadowing ever. And huge surprise here, it has to do with the Harley text from chapter 1138 and the super cool mural that we see on Elbaf. And today we're gonna focus on the right side of the mural here, you know, the segment that seems to depict the first world of the Harley text. And this, in case you don't know, is the section that probably details Nika's arrival, how he liberated the slaves, and the wrath of him and the Hellflame Serpent that plunged the entire One Piece world into darkness. And that totally sounds like Enies Lobby to me, right? Right? Okay, I'm just messing with you here. I haven't gotten to the fun and juicy details quite yet, but what I really want to focus on here is actually this right here. Oh, no, not that part. That's the Loki Ragnar stuff I was talking about a few videos ago. Also cool, but editor, can you go a little bit to the right here? Okay, you're getting closer. Actually, we'll come back to this thing in this video as well because it's important, but no, that's not it. A little bit down. Oh, okay, cool. Perfect. This is the one. Okay, what we see here is a massive hole, nice, that goes deep down into the earth, creating what appears to be an almost endless pit that Enies Lobby, you know, kind of looks like it could sit on top of that pretty easily, I think. I mean, come on, look at that. That's a great, like a really nice hole. And this thing has always bothered me for my entire career for a ton of different reasons. First off, what even are the physics behind this supposed to be? Like, why is there what seems to be like an endless waterfall in Enies Lobby? How does that even work? Like, the hydrodynamics of this are kind of all over the place, but I think I've discovered how the Harleyan mural may actually help us finally decipher a lot of the questions that we have left about this place. And so by the end of this video, you will have a way better understanding why the world government most likely decided to set up shop at this weird specific location. And I gotta be completely honest, dude, this was one of my greatest theory problems for many years because there wasn't anything in the series that tied to this weird place until now. You see, both Egghead Island and Elbaf may both have provided two answers for what is going on with this pit, and in fact, I don't think they're two different answers, they're the same one, but, you know, Oda gave them to us in two pieces. And I'm convinced that the truth behind this chasm and how it was made are incredibly important to the series at large, to its ending, and something also tells me that Luffy and the crew may have to return to this location at some point in the future. And it does tie to this section of the mural, and yes, that little spaceship thing as well, but okay. So I've been a little bit cryptic about the origins of this thing, so instead let me just, you know, go put my cards here on the table and really show you what we're working with here. Because I actually believe that it is, in fact, the former site of this Forbidden Sun harvesting factory that we see depicted in the mural on the bottom right here, and that it was also created by the ancient weapon Uranus. Now, that part might not feel like a pretty big deal to you, as plenty of people, including myself, have talked about how the Enies Lobby hole shares a remarkable amount of similarities to the massive pit where Lulusia once was. I can't find it on a map anymore, but believe me, it is a big deal. Okay, just look at them side by side here. They're twins, twin holes, two big chasms in the ocean that seemingly fall into nothingness. Which actually leads me to another mini theory about the abyss that the Holy Knights seem to use that I'll get, to in just a moment here. But first, let's look at the facts. Enies Lobby is full of a bunch of geological features that straight up make no freaking sense. First off, this island is reared by plenty of whirlpools and one of the mysterious Gates of Justice, which are these giant unexplained structures made by the world government between their biggest strongholds. Now, the island itself is just floating, I guess, on top of this, pit, and is just connected by the Bridge of Hesitation and the small bit of landmass to the front of it. And then, have you ever bothered to actually look at the residential structures that we see on Enies Lobby? Like, these things are totally different in design from the marine buildings like the courthouse or the day station that we see. Their color is completely different, their design is much older and beaten down, and a very rudimentary design in general. It's funny, they actually kind of look like they belong much more alongside the buildings on Zou or Shandora. Funny coincidence, but not to me. These buildings seem specifically designed by Oda to be way older looking than the government buildings, and yet somehow they are still surrounded by a massive gaping hole that most likely was created by using an ancient weapon. So, what could all of these things here have in common, and what could it all mean? Well, I think that it's pretty clear if you're a One Piece history nerd that these are all things connected to the ancient kingdom. Good job. Now, Zou is on the back of Zunisha, the home of the Minks, a race that we see depicted on the mural from chapter 1138, fighting alongside what appears to be Joyboy. Obviously, there's the fact that Zunisha heralded in Luffy's big transformation into Joyboy by proclaiming that Joyboy has returned with the sound of the drums of liberation. Then, on the other hand, we have Shandora, a city populated by the Sky Races, who, you guessed it, are also once again depicted on both halves of the mural here. Shandora, by the way, a place where we first learned of the Sun God and the other three gods, and it's part of the arc where Luffy strikes his very first Nika pose in the story, and it's also incredibly deeply connected to the oldest and most ancient things that we have in One Piece lore. And so, isn't it very convenient that Enies Lobby, which we now know most likely is the result of the ancient weapon Uranus being used to create a massive hole in the ocean, shares architecture with ancient civilizations like Zou and Shandora? I mean, it just kind of seems to me like Oda really wants us to draw this connection and point to the world government setting up base on this very spot for a very particular reason. And I think that this reason goes way further back than just the era of Joyboy. This massive Enies Lobby pit right here was the only one that we currently knew existed prior to what happened to Lulusia Island. And again, let me bring you to the main point of this video. There is a massive hole in the mural that clearly was used to extract something from deep down within the planet at some point during the original first world. The pulley elevator here and the depiction of slaves or people going into the earth and bringing out sparks seem to indicate that something big is going on here. So I've personally now come to the conclusion that these two holes are one and the same. It's just something that occurred that made the mineshaft or structure that was previously here collapse and flood. And now this entire idea originally came to me because of the fact that at Enies Lobby, it's always bright and day, which at first is such a crazy and nonsensical thing, but might make sense if the Forbidden Sun is literally located right here below the earth. And with a massive hole below it, the island always having access to sunlight could now suddenly make sense. I'm actually insanely curious if Lulusia potentially is gonna be eternally bright now as well. But then also, seeing as the light doesn't actually seem to come out of the hole, instead I do think that this choice may have been a very intentional choice by Oda to hint at its true purpose. While the light itself may maybe not come from the dark abyss below itself, it is specifically framed above it, indicating that this location has something to do with the Forbidden Sun. We just didn't really know that it existed yet when the crew was first on this island. And well, I'll just spare you the theatrics here. We know exactly what that was because Vegapunk confirmed to us that at some point during Joyboy's era, the world was once again flooded and buried everything underneath the waves. But now we can actually go one giant step further back because we can see that before then, before the era of Joyboy even, there were super advanced structures and civilizations with crazy advanced technology that were also destroyed as a result of probably actually Nika and the Hellflame Serpent, because according to the Harley text and the mural here, we do know that Nika and this serpent monster thing depicted helped envelop the entire first world in darkness. And seeing as the One Piece world is pretty much in a completely flooded state, I do think that this destruction that Nika and the serpent caused could line up really well with the idea that I've proposed, that the world flooded not just once, but at least 2 times in the past. And well, it kind of starts to help me paint a picture of what may have actually happened during these big void centuries and earlier battles in the One Piece history. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you might remember a video I recently put out talking about how I'm very confident that the Forbidden Sun, or the Eternal Flame, whatever you want to call it nowadays, is located deep below the crust and inside the core of the One Piece planet. Based on the mural, it does look as if the ancient people of the first world had an operation set up to harvest it, which then aligns with the text saying men touched the Forbidden Sun. And the idea here would be that Imu, or like his predecessor, previously either gained access to the Forbidden Sun by using Uranus to blast a hole into the earth, or that possibly someone who made the ancient weapons had already left this hole, and then Imu maybe just went inside or discovered it when they were obviously not supposed to. Now, personally, I think that either option really works here, especially when you consider the language used to describe the ancient weapons. I mean, I've talked about this quite often before, but in the original Japanese of One Piece, the word ancient isn't actually used all that much when it's translated. Like, the ancient kingdom that we know is actually more accurately described as the Great Kingdom, and the word ancient is actually only used to describe the literal ancient weapons, making it very much seem as if these weapons even predate the Void Century, which again makes a lot of sense and probably were even created or first came into play before that during the First World period here. Now, for me, this kind of points at the idea that these might not even be real weapons at all, but possibly just giant industrial sci-fi tools used to harvest things from the planet or straight up terraform it. And seeing as the First World seemed to be having a massive industrial revolution from how it's depicted in the mural right here, you know, we see all the pollution here and everything, I do think the idea that Uranus is actually a tool used to dig deep into the world makes a ton of sense, don't you think? Especially if this floating spaceship thing right here on the mural is a depiction of the very ancient weapon. It would be in the right place at the right time, and it would also be perfectly used to dig down to the core if it's the same weapon that Imu is using in the modern era to wipe out a kingdom like Lulusia, just that that was not its original purpose. Its original purpose was digging really big holes. And it's for that very reason that I believe that Enies Lobby may rest above the original entrance to the planet's core. And let me just cook here for a second, because I do think I may be onto something, because it seems to me like Imu, as the secret ruler of the world government, established a judicial stronghold on top of it as a way to guarantee that they'd always have access to that very chasm that they originally tried to exploit. And based on the designs from the mural of this king figure with the same crown as Imu and the demon, I personally don't think I'm too crazy to say that Imu probably is much older and was very much relevant as a character in the old ages of the story as well. This shadow demon thing and the king here have elements like the crown, the menacing design that Imu has, and considering that all these figures are framed as the enemy in these eras, at least what it looks like to me here, I think that makes a ton of sense. But it isn't all just hypothetical or loosely connected evidence today, don't worry. I mean, sure, all these things line up pretty well and make sense, but I of course need to show you an actual motive here. I do need to prove to you why I think that Imu was the one who dug that pit in the first place, which actually should be the easiest part, considering the only person we've seen make a hole like this is Imu in the story, period. Because by using the Mother Flame that Vegapunk created to replicate the Eternal Flame's power, Imu appears to use an ancient weapon to wipe Lulusia off the map here, making the second ever ocean void pit thing, hole, whatever you want to call it. And in case you're wondering, to be completely honest, I do think that there are probably plenty more of these, you know, in the One Piece world, based on how much the ocean does seem to have risen thanks to Vegapunk's calculations. And the only reason I'm a little bit careful with, you know, stating for sure that it's Uranus is because technically we don't know that yet officially, but since we do know where Pluton and Poseidon are, and the fact that Vegapunk said that an ancient weapon was used to raise the sea level, you know, the way that this very pit did as well, I think it's pretty safe to say that it was Uranus, at least for the sake of this theory. And quite frankly, all of the Egghead Island arc kind of starts to paint a way better picture of how and why they would even want to do this. Now, I don't know if it's maybe because I've been rewatching the anime now that it's flashback, but I'm actively reminded of why Saturn, Kizaru, and the Marines even decided to come and invade Egghead Island to begin with, because it wasn't just to kill Vegapunk for learning the true history or to fight the Straw Hats. The mission was specifically to secure the Mother Flame, a piece of technology based on the Eternal Flame, which, as we learn in Elbaf, seems to be capable of powering some truly insane factories, machines, and society itself. At least that's what Vegapunk and this mural both seem to imply here, and seeing as Imu is the one in charge and also the one with a weapon that is powered by the Forbidden Sun, you and I both can see what's really going on here at this point. Because it really seems as if Imu is trying to regain access to the Forbidden Sun, something that they used to be able to access through Enies' lobby. That's why they're working on the Mother Flame, so that they can actually power Uranus to create another hole to the center of the Earth and finally regain access to this power source, something that they no longer can access because of the great floods that occurred. See how this all kind of nicely ties together? And I don't really think that the hole itself is the problem here, to be clear. It's still there, and it still, well, clearly goes very, very deep. I just believe that the pathway has now just been completely submerged under the ocean and cannot be used anymore since the infrastructure is full of water. I would say that there's a pretty high chance of this to be the case, that the Forbidden Sun doesn't even exist anymore, and that amount of water could have just straight up put it out, making it truly an empty pit down to nothingness. But then again, hey, maybe there is something that Imu could eventually do that might clear the flood, and that's why they patiently are waiting on top of a hole and digging new ones to finally go back down there. And this could actually tie really nicely into something I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Abyss. This ancient, dark, magic, demonic power that the Holy Knights and the Gorosei use seems to be directly attached to Imu and their goals. But also, whenever it's being used, these mystical dark flames appear, and Abyss is a very specific term and just literally means a deep and bottomless chasm. And in One Piece, we've now seen two abysses, the Enies Lobby hole and the Lulusia hole, and you can probably see where I'm going with this. I'm saying that way down there, the Forbidden Sun, there is a mystical fiery energy source, forbidden black flames. I don't think it's too insane to say that the abyss that the Celestial Dragons are actually using may straight up be tied to the Forbidden Sun and this hole, possibly using lingering bits of its power to travel across the world. And so the name Abyss may just straight up come from where it draws its power from, which is the giant hole in the planet that leads down to the Forbidden Sun. Now, just to play devil's advocate for a second, an argument against this would be that the Forbidden Sun and the Mother Flame are drawn to look light and whimsical, meanwhile the Abyss seems infernal and dark, but I do think that it's truly a matter of perception and artistic liberty here, because we don't actually see what the real Forbidden Sun looks like at this point. We just see how the giants decided to draw it, and the truth may be that the flame is much darker or much more evil in its full form, or maybe these dark flames show that the power is flooded and corrupted, not able to produce the same pure energy as it once did. And this of course would actually shift a ton of the ancient history as we know it, and based on just a silly little hole, I think that we've uncovered the narrative of the Void Century. Now, bear with me here, of course, I'm not saying this is 100% true, but I really think this makes a ton of sense and would be a really fun way for Oda to spin things if that was actually the case. Because the idea here is that the floods were not a result of battle or a mistake of Joyboy's part, like, things seem to be framed by the poneglyphs and Imu. I've even said this myself before with my Bing Sake theory, but no, now I actually think that Joyboy used Poseidon and Pluton on purpose to flood the world as a necessary measure of burying the Forbidden Sun and taking it away from Imu. The giant demon that he's fighting on the left side of the mural, I think that is Imu using the Eternal Flame to do some really insane damage, and Joyboy's alliance had to flood the entire world to prevent it from being completely used and accessible. That would explain why Joyboy had issued an apology to the Fishman, because he could not bring them to the surface since, well, he ended up flooding the entire world. There was basically no more surface for them to go up to, not in his era at least. And when the world floods, of course society needs to end up moving upwards based on there being islands in the modern era, but outside of Wano and Alabasta, cities that were pretty high up on what used to be mountaintops. And I say this because we do know that the world flooded, and yet these old buildings still are completely intact and untouched. And that means that pre-flood they had to be way higher up on plateaus or mountains. And thinking of that, there was probably nowhere else for the Fishman to really go. And I really feel like we've been seeing and hearing about the ancient weapon's destructive potential for so long in a story, but it really hasn't become clear until recently just how insanely powerful they could really be. I mean, they can destroy entire islands in minutes and flood an entire planet, so this is something I'd probably go out of my way to disable as a power source if the person using them, was a destructive and evil king trying to rule the world. That was a really fun one from like last year, and I still like it quite a bit. But I'd also love to go back at this point, obviously, and actually tie it in way more closely to some of the other Joyboy related stuff we've been learning about. I mean, one thing I'm definitely thinking about while looking back at this one in the context of all the others is Joyboy's symbol, right? Like, you remember I started off this entire video talking about how I think that each circle might represent an ally, but the thing is, I haven't been able to assign all 8 dots to 8 countries, but if one of those dots was destroyed, like Enies Lobby or something at Enies Lobby clearly was, that could perfectly explain that. Maybe Laugh Tale, maybe something else. But there's a whole other side to the story too Into the Void Century, because all of these theories have of course dealt with Joyboy's faction, but Emu and the world government have had 800 years to prepare for the final phase of their plan. They've seized control of the world itself, and in particular have taken over crucial structures like Impel Down, the Gates of Justice, and even the Red Line itself, and you can see the true purpose of these government structures in this video, because clearly Emu didn't build those most likely. They stole or inherited it from somewhere else. So if you're curious, check that out. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Thanks to our Patreons. If you have any theories or ideas based on what you've seen today, please put it in the comments. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for a long series like this, please let me know as well. Otherwise, have a fantastic day.